Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku and Bakugou's chaotic reunion broke the squads? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Katsuki groaned, kicking the leg of the table with the toe of his heavy black boot and jolting all the books and pens splayed across it. Kirishima startled and looked up. "Bro," he said quietly. "This is a library. Don't do that." Katsuki glared at him. Hurry up then, I want lunch already." "I told you, we're meeting some people at still have 15 minutes. I just need to finish this chapter," Kirishima told him before returning to his biology textbook and notes. They'd been studying in the library for almost 2 hours, and Katsuki had finished his work 30 minutes ago. He was never one for patience, but somehow his shitty friends had roped him into some lunch meetup with a different group. He really wasn't looking forward to it, but he also knew that his loud but talkative friends could be a very effective shield in social situations. And they forced him into a lot of social situations. He could have easily counted on one hand his number of friends before his second year of middle school, 1. 2, if he counted the stray dog that always followed him almost all the way home. He just wasn't a friends person. He had the one he had, and he was good with that. That was, until that one friend moved halfway across the country and left him with just the dog. Going into high school, he was still his brash, abrasive, narcissistic self, not expecting or wanting to make friends. But Kirishima saw Katsuki and somehow got the idea in his head that he had to be bros with him. All the other dumbasses just followed along with shitty hair, and they'd all ended up in the same college, and boom, he was still stuck with them. Finally, a quiet buzz emanated from Kirishima's phone on the table, and he looked up from his book, checking the text. "Oh, looks like they're here. And they brought a new guy." Katsuki grumbled. "Great, more people." Kirishima closed his textbook and started gathering up all his stuff. "Let's get moving, dude." Katsuki huffed and grabbed his bag off the floor, having already packed up. He stood, impatiently tapping his foot, watching Kirishima collect his sheet and dump it into his bag haphazardly. When Kirishima eventually managed to grab the last pens and flyaway papers, Katsuki quickly made for the exit, ignoring the librarian's farewell and busting through the doors. He breathed in the fresh air, much better than the inside of their stuffy school library, and Kirishima came out behind him. "Where are we going?" Katsuki asked, having not been listening when Kirishima told him the first time. "The other guys bought takeout, and we're meeting them on the field picnic tables," Kirishima answered, bounding down the steps like an overgrown puppy. Seriously, the guy was huge. Katsuki hated standing next to him because he felt so short, despite being a solid 5 feet 9 inches and relatively bulky in terms of muscles. Over average, at least. But Kirishima was a whole different story. Built like a tank with the personality and kindness of a golden retriever. It followed Kirishima down the steps and towards the huge grassy expanse next to the campus. Katsuki had been at college for half a year now, and he had the campus mostly figured out. The field was one of his favorite places. He could do anything on it, including just take off running like he sometimes had the impulse of doing. Right now, though, he just fell into step beside his friend and waited for him to find whoever they were looking for. His eyes roamed over the subtle hills of the field where students were milling about. Some were chatting on picnic blankets, some working in study groups, some playing music. Katsuki scowled at the music players. If people wanted to hear their fang racket, they'd ask. "I think that's them," Kirishima called, reaching a tanned arm up to wave at a group of people on an opposite hill. Katsuki looked up, squinting at the group. He recognized Mina's pink hair and Kaminari's shock of yellow, as well as Siro's tree figure, and noticed the 2 tall men and 2 short women he didn't recognize, but what really caught his eye was a slightly less tall boy in the middle of it all. The boy had green hair, and a relaxed posture, with his hands moving about wildly as he said something to Kaminari and the guy with white and red hair. No, there was no fing way. As the other group came closer, Katsuki slowly realized that, yes, there was a fing way. Because somehow, Deku himself was standing on the grass at Katsuki's school, 10 feet in front of him for the first time in 5 years. Deku laughed and Katsuki felt his heart twinge, then Deku turned to meet his eyes and they both froze. Deku's emerald eyes flashed in recognition and his mouth fell open slightly. Katsuki just kept staring. What the hell was he supposed to do here? His childhood friend turned kind of bullying victim but still friend turned nothing was right there. Deku was right there. Why was Deku right there? But he also wasn't quite sure this was Deku. The Deku of Katsuki's memories was small, spindly, and overall tiny. He shrunk into himself nervously around strangers. This Deku was tall and a fit with lean muscles, and he had an air of confidence and security. But he still had the same dumb freckles everywhere, and the same dumb bright eyes, and the same wild forest hair that looked like he'd walked through a windstorm every morning. Suddenly, there was a glint in Deku's eye that Katsuki recognized from all those years ago, and both boys' body language went tense. Katsuki dropped his book bag off his shoulder, brought up his hands ever so slightly and, in a flash of green and blonde, they lunged at each other and started their familiar struggle to wrestle the other to the ground. Deku's hand caught Katsuki's left hook and he swung up to try and land a hit on Katsuki's stomach, but Katsuki wasn't planning on exchanging punches this time. He threw himself into Deku with all his weight, sending them both toppling to the ground. Deku yelped and kicked up at Katsuki's chest, and Katsuki nearly laughed when he saw the customary red high tops. He couldn't believe Deku was still wearing those. The red shoe connected with his chest and made him fly sideways onto his back, just barely grabbing Deku's shirt collar. He used the momentum of his fall and Deku's attempt to jump on top of him to fling Deku over him and further down the hill, rolling them both over until he landed on him heavily. Katsuki was about to announce his triumph when Deku grinned up at him mischievously. Before he knew what was happening, legs hooked over his shoulder from under his arms and he was slammed back into the dirt and grass. Sheet, the nerd had learned some new moves. Still not good enough for Katsuki, though. Katsuki grabbed Deku's ankle and threw his legs to the side, and then before he could do anything more, he was being dragged away. He glared up in Kirishima and tried to wriggle free. "Let me go, shitty hair," he yelled. He heard Deku yelp and turned to see him being caged in the arms of the big guy with glasses, looking flushed and pouty like a grumpy bunny. "Dude, what the F are you doing?" Kirishima snapped, pulling Katsuki to his feet by the shirt collar and glaring at him. Katsuki grabbed Kirishima's arm and kicked his legs around to try and get free. "I'll fight," Deku and Katsuki said at the same time. Katsuki let loose a tiny laugh at their simultaneous answers and used Kirishima's moment of shock to kick him in the shins, making shitty hair drop him to the ground. He whirled around to see Deku being chided by four eyes and the brunette with a round face. As if Deku could sense him staring, he turned to meet Katsuki's eyes and broke into a grin. The same sunny grin he'd always had. "I won," he announced. "You so effing you did not. We didn't finish. I had you pinned and then the fight ended, that means I won," Deku claimed, closing the distance between the two of them despite his friend's protests behind him. Katsuki glared up at him, shoving down the sudden shock that Deku was now taller than him. That he'd still be the intimidating one here. "That doesn't FNG count," he growled. "It totally does. Now, you know the rules," Deku said, holding out an upturned, expectant hand. Katsuki slapped the hand away, ignoring the new scars he saw on them. "I'm not giving you any because you didn't FNG win," he said. Deku wagged a finger at him. "You know the rules, Kaken," he repeated. Hearing the nickname again made Katsuki's heart jump in his chest. "Give me candy or I get your left shoe," he said, reciting the rules they made up for their all fights as they called them. At 4 years old, they both had decided on their future as superheroes, just like their comic book idol, All Might. Didn't matter how much their parents told them it wasn't possible, that's what they were doing. They had started the wrestling matches as practice for fighting villains, which was genius plan to their toddler brains. The habit had stuck their whole lives, apparently even after 5 years of virtually no contact. "I'm not giving you my shoe," Katsuki yelled, completely forgetting that all of his and Deku's friends were watching. "Fine then." Deku shifted into a fighting stance, crouching down. Guess I'll have to take them. Rematch, Deku dash. Katsuki cut himself off with an indignant yell as he was dragged backwards by Kirishima again. Bakugou bro, why the hell are you fighting strangers? Kirishima cried. How can you hate Midoriya before you've been introduced? Mina groaned, throwing her hands up. This is a new low, even for your socially constipated butt. I don't effing hate him and he's not a stranger. Katsuki groaned loudly. You really mean that? Katsuki looked up to meet Deku's green eyes. They looked teary. Yeah, this was definitely Deku. What the F dash, Deku, Katsuki said flatly, shaking out of Kirishima's hold. Suddenly, Deku broke free of his friends and tackled Katsuki with a hug. Katsuki hadn't been expecting how heavy he was and had to twirl in a circle to keep from toppling back to the ground, which would have surely turned into another wrestling match. Get off, you leech! He yelped as Deku held him. I missed you, Kaken, Deku said, squeezing him tighter with his new, weirdly strong arms. Katsuki flailed around to try and push him off, but Deku didn't let go. Katsuki growled, face pressed into Deku's shoulder, knowing what he needed to say. Okay, fine, I missed you too. A little. A lot. He realized his mistake too late. He'd hoped the admission would make Deku let up, but instead he found himself being lifted off his feet to Deku's squeak of surprise. That was as much as he could take, and he lifted his legs to kick Deku's thighs. Deku yelped and finally released him to the grass. Damn it, Deku, Katsuki swore. Since when did you get strong and sheet? Deku grinned his stupid blinding grin that Katsuki missed so much and flexed his freckled arms. Since the past 5 years, Kaken. He stepped towards Katsuki, grin turning playful and a bit mischievous. And I guess I'm taller now. Katsuki yelled and lunged, but Deku had been expecting it and ducked under his arms, sweeping to the side. Instead, Katsuki rammed into Kirishima and wheezed. He turned to glare at Deku. You fucker, I'll kill you for that. I can't control my height. Yo, dudes, Kaminari cut in, holding a hand out. Can we back up maybe 5 or more steps here? You two know each other? Obviously, dumbass. Katsuki snarled as Deku said, yeah. How? Katsuki and Deku gave each other a look, then Deku shrugged. Childhood? I don't know, Kaken's been my best friend since forever. If you're best friends, then why are you throwing hands on sight? Mina asked. All fights, Katsuki and Deku said, again at the exact same time. All fight for all might. Deku chanted. Katsuki groaned. One for all and all for one, he responded on automatic. We won't give up, till evil is done. They both finished, Deku saying it excitedly while Katsuki said it like he was being forced to buy a crying child for the billionth time in a minute. You are so stupid, he grumbled. The two groups of friends were just staring at them, shell-shocked. Deku suddenly squeezed him into another hug, this one from the side, and Katsuki yelped and shoved him off quickly. You got your one hug a hole? Deku let go. I have 5 years of hugs backed up, though. Nope, that's not how it works. Okay, what is the deal here? Shiro said abruptly. Beef, do you mean soy sauce? Katsuki snapped. I mean, what's the deal? You two start brawling the second you see each other? Which is very uncharacteristic behavior, Midoriya, 4 eyes cut in. And now you're reciting rhymes and saying you're best friends? Shiro finished. Yeah, and Katsuki said, frowning at Shiro like he was an idiot. What exactly was he so confused about? That's just how he and Deku were. Suddenly, all their friends burst into questions, voices overlapping. Since when do you have friends that aren't us, Bakugou? Why'd you never mention him? What is all fight? Why did you want his shoe? Why would you assault your friends? What's up with Deku and Kaken? Why do you dash? Ugh. Katsuki groaned at full volume, drawing it out. Shut the F up. This is a lot of questions. Deku said, putting his hands out in front of him like his friends were going to attack. Can we just effing eat? Katsuki grumbled. You can ask us questions as we eat. Deku suggested. No, Katsuki corrected. They can ask you questions. I'm not effing dealing with that. Fine then, Kaken. I guess I'll just tell them all about the time Auntie said you couldn't keep Missy and you cried the whole day. Katsuki's eyes went wide and he kicked Deku's leg. I didn't cry that much. And I was 6. All of Katsuki's friends had started laughing. Missy? Mina choked out. Missy was a stray dog who lived by our school. Deku explained. Kaken named her. He named a stray dog Missy? Kaminari laughed incredulously. Full name missile launcher, of course. Katsuki's friends cackled even harder, and Katsuki growled and lunged at Deku. Deku met him head-on, grabbing his hands and pushing back against him. Before they could go further, Kirishima and Four Eyes were dragging them apart again. Stop doing that, he yelled. Then stop attacking each other. Kirishima responded. Midoriya, what has gotten into you? Four Eyes said, chopping his arm up and down like a malfunctioning robot. It's just Kaken. Deku said, like that explained everything. It should, at least Katsuki thought so. Does Kaken make you feel sick or something, Midoriya? The tall guy with half-white, half-red hair said, frowning. Don't call me that, you Canadian flag a-hole. Katsuki snapped. The guy looked up with slightly wider eyes. Am I the Canadian flag a-hole? He asked voice. Monotone. Was he messing with him? Obviously, idiot. Why can I not call you Kaken? It is what Midoriya calls you, yes. Yeah, and it's what only Deku calls me, Katsuki growled, feeling his old rage bubbling back up. It would be Bakugou to you. Or you could just not ever speak to me, half and half be. The boy's expression didn't change one bit. You have creative nicknames, Bakugou. And you are very aggressive. Katsuki huffed and stomped towards him. You have a FNG problem, half-see? Deku stopped him with a hand on his chest. Kaken, wait. Please don't get into fights with my friends. My name is Todoroki Shoto, half and half said, bowing slightly. Okay, this guy had to be messing with him. And I don't effing care, Katsuki retorted. Kaken, Deku whined, giving him a look. You are not making a good impression here. Teach, who cares about your shitty extras? Or my shitty extras, for that matter. Ah, they're your extras? Kaken, you have friends. Deku poked his head around Katsuki to look at the dumbass squad behind him. How'd you manage that? Hard work and perseverance, Kirishima announced, pumping his fist. And a very long time. Mina added. Shut the F up, all of you, Katsuki interrupted, making his friends laugh. Katsuki tensed up, about to yell, then let out all the anger with a long huff and counting to 10 like the school therapist had taught him. He turned back to Deku's friends. You people brought food, right? Deku gave him a questioning look, then smiled. He returned the smile with a small glare and huffed growl. Yeah, we did. Deku answered. Great, Katsuki deadpanned, turning to grab his bag off the ground and then sitting down. Deku smiled and hopped over to sit next to him, then waved all their friends over. They looked cautious and confused, and Katsuki performed a mocking version of Deku's smile and wave. Finally, all 10 people were sitting on the grass in a circle, and Round Cheeks and the girl that made Katsuki think of a frog were taking food boxes out of their bags. Hey, we should all be formally introduced, first, Kirishima said from his spot next to Katsuki. Oh yeah. Deku agreed from Katsuki's other side. Wonderful, he was trapped between the sunshine extroverts. May it meant he'd have to talk less. Okay, well my name is Midoriya Izuku. Nice to meet you all. Katsuki friends tittered their greetings and pleasantries, Akatsuki just stayed quiet. There was a poke on his shoulder, and he turned to see Deku watching him expectantly. He huffed. Bakugou Katsuki. Deku kept staring. Nice to meet you or whatever. He rolled his eyes when Deku smiled. He tried to make himself care about the others' names. Round Cheeks was Uraraka something other, For Eyes was Ida, and the frog girl told everyone to call her Tsu. Lastly, there was Todoroki Shoto, and Katsuki hated that he remembered that full name. He tuned out when they started talking about majors and things, instead trying to keep himself in check, impatient for food. He also couldn't stop thinking about Deku next to him. They hadn't seen each other in 5 years, and yet the second they did, It was like they'd never been apart. It made Katsuki feel those stupid warm fuzzies that Deku had been bringing around his whole life. He didn't know what the feeling meant, he just knew that it was a good feeling, but he hated it because he didn't get it. He came out of head when he heard Deku start talking. Used to live pretty far away from here, but I got a scholarship middle of the year and now I'm transferring. It'll dash. What? Katsuki suddenly yelled, digging his fingers into the ground so hard he ripped up a chunk of dirt and grass. Deku beamed at him. Yeah. I'm starting classes next week. Katsuki's heart was racing. He reached up to smear the dirt across Deku's freckled cheeks, making him squeal. And when were you going to tell me this? Deku laughed and tried to rub the dirt off his face, but really only succeeded in spreading it around. I wanted to call you, but I don't have your number anymore. He destroyed a couple phones in his middle and high school days, meaning he didn't have the same number he did 5 years ago. With a flutter in his chest, he wondered if Deku had ever tried calling or messaging him before. Also, I didn't know you went to school here. Deku continued. You could have asked my mom or something, Katsuki said without meaning to. Why did he care about this so much? Yes, Deku was his friend. A friend he missed. A lot. But then why did he feel like he was going into cardiac arrest about going to school with the guy? Deku opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He puffed out his cheeks. I did not think of that. Katsuki hurled a fistful of grass him. Idiot. Deku tried to slap the grass away, then gave Katsuki a wild grin. Katsuki returned it, but once again Kirishima grabbed the back of his shirt and yanked him back, like he already could tell what they were about to do. Oh my god, what is up with you two? Kirishima said, letting go of Katsuki's shirt as he growled. Are you going to keep trying to fight each other this whole time? Round Cheeks asked. You haven't let us finish a FING match yet, so yeah, Katsuki snapped. Round Cheeks gave him a confused frown. Actually, I won, but Kaken won't admit it, so we have to keep going, Deku said with a cocky smile. Katsuki punched his shoulder, bumping him into Frog Girl next to him. You did not win, shitty nerd. I did, and you owe me candy or a shoe already. A shoe? Todoroki asked, frowning slightly. Every motion on the guy's face was slight. He was practically expressionless. That's the rule, Deku explained. Loser of the all fight has to give winner candy within 5 minutes, or else the winner can throw their left shoe in the river. Katsuki's friends started laughing behind him. Katsuki groaned and threw another chunk of dirt at Deku, hitting him square in the mouth. Deku coughed and spat grass out of his mouth, wiping it off his tongue with a disgusted look. Kaken! That's playing dirty. Katsuki couldn't hold back a snort of laughter at the unintentional pun, and Deku giggled. The sound made his heart squeeze again. What kind of rules are those? Kaminari cackled, halfway around the circle from Katsuki. The kind of rules a 4-year-old makes up, dunce face, Katsuki growled. Shiro laughed loudly. So, you're saying Bakugou has to give Midoriya candy or his shoe or you won't stop fighting? That, or we have to continue our match and one of us wins for sure, Deku said. As much as Katsuki wanted to keep wrestling with Deku like they were kids again, he also really wanted to eat. And his heart was so beating fast at the sound of Deku giggling that he wasn't sure he'd win anyways. Not that he would ever say that out loud. Because of this, he groaned loudly, untied his left boot, took it off, and threw at Deku. Deku barely caught the heavy thing with a small oof as it connected with his chest. He held up the boot like a trophy, making his dumb curls bounce around and his eyes shine as he grinned. He admits defeat. Like hell I do, I just want to eat already, Katsuki growled. He took off his other boot for good measure and shifted into a cross-legged position, glaring as his friends laughed. Deku, if you throw that in a river, I'll kill you, he warned. Deku smiled and set the boot down next to him. I don't even think there's a river near here. So, are you done trying to jump each other? Round Cheeks asked. For now, Deku and Katsuki answered in sync. Katsuki scowled at him as Deku smiled and laughed some more. Dinin shitty nerd, Katsuki grumbled with a hint of affection. Can we effing eat now or am I gonna have to leave for my own sheet? There is no need for that kind of language. Four Eyes cut in, chopping his hand up and down. Katsuki scowled at him. I talk how I want. Kaken's always been a potty mouth. Katsuki raised an eyebrow and snorted. What are we and you five? Potty mouth? Deku moved towards him and Four Eyes jolted to attention, probably thinking it was another attack. But Katsuki knew better and leaned back to let Deku flop down face up into his lap, smiling up at him. His green hair fell back, splaying out over Katsuki's legs. Katsuki flicked his exposed forehead, making him laugh and stick his tongue out. Why did his stomach feel all fluttery? What the hell? He heard Kaminari murmur under his breath. Katsuki growled at him, but for some reason didn't snap back. Something in the back of his mind told him it was because Deku was there, but he ignored the thought. Okay, well, if you two are done with whatever you were doing, let's eat. Round Cheeks said, clapping her hands together and starting to open the takeout boxes. Yes, and then you are telling us all about this whole situation, Mina said, putting her hands out towards the two of them and waving them around to make her point. I'd call it friendship? Deku said, trying to look at her but keeping his head in Katsuki's lap. Katsuki just rolled his eyes and grabbed the spiciest thing he could find in the spread of food. Mina looked them up and down. Yes, friendship, let's elaborate on that. I'll try my best, Deku said, all bright and cheery. For the next 2 hours, Katsuki just sat back and listened to Deku talk animatedly about every little thing with their friends, only cutting in to add his perspective on certain stories or stop the nerd from mumbling. Deku eventually sat up from his lap to eat but didn't move more than an inch away from him. On multiple occasions he had to use his Deku senses to block an excited hand from hitting him in the nose, and after the 5th time he stuck his socked foot over Deku's face as retribution. Eventually, it hit the time where Katsuki had to get going to his later classes, as well as some of the other people in their group, so they packed up their stuff to go. Here you go, Kaken, Deku called before tossing his boots at him, which was unnecessary, seeing as they were sitting right next to each other. Katsuki snatched them out of the air and shoved them on, then put a hand on Deku's head to push himself up to his feet. Deku laughed and swatted his hand away, then grabbed onto his elbow. Katsuki couldn't tell if Deku was trying to stand or pull Katsuki down again, but he didn't let himself fall and Deku soon jumped up next to him. Then, with all the courage of a crazy man, Deku lifted a hand and shoved it down into Katsuki's spiky blonde hair, ruffling it around and bringing attention to their height difference. Katsuki kicked him in the shins, growling, but Deku just jumped away and laughed. Oh hey! Deku said before Katsuki could tackle him. He pulled a yellow phone out of his pocket, and Katsuki could immediately tell it had an all-mic case. Deku held the phone out to him. Here, give me your number so I can have it again. Katsuki grabbed the phone and saw that it was open to a contact by the name of Kaken. Sad face with his old phone number typed out below. He scowled. Why do I get a frowny face? Deku startled, then rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Oh well, I texted you a bunch after I left but you never responded, so... Katsuki's heart hurt to think that he could have been in contact with Deku all this time. I was so sad that you left I smashed my phone, and the hag didn't let me get a new one for a year, he explained. Deku's eyes went wide, then he started to laugh. Oh my god, Kaken. Why would you of course? Of course. Katsuki snapped. What's that supposed to mean? Deku waved a hand. Never mind, just put your number in, I'll change the name. Katsuki huffed at him, then switched the contact from his old number. At the last second he changed the contact name to Kaken. Laughing face and handed the phone back. Deku giggled when he saw it, then typed something into his phone. Katsuki's phone buzzed in his pocket and he put the new number under Deku. Great, now we're in contact. Deku beamed at him. Talk to you later, Kaken. Yeah, whatever, Katsuki responded with an instant of a smile. They each turned and walked back to their respective friend groups, and Katsuki caught all his friends staring at him with funny smiles that made him feel uneasy. What? He snapped. Nothing, Mina said, grinning. Dingly dash. Kaken, wait. Katsuki turned to see Deku jogging over to him. He came to a stop in front of Katsuki holding out his hand like he was expecting a handshake. like he was expecting the handshake. No, Katsuki said immediately. Deku shook his outstretched hand side to side. Come on, you have to. No, I don't. Please see. It's been 5 years. Please do it. Deku whined. Please, Kaken? Just this one more time. Katsuki knew full well that Deku would be trying this sheet every time they saw each other, but he just groaned and rolled his eyes. Fine. Deku squealed in happy victory as Katsuki held out his hand the same way. They moved their hands towards each other, thumbs catching and then turning their hands into finger guns before pulling apart and pumping a fist in the air. Plus ultra. Deku shouted enthusiastically. Plus fucking ultra, Katsuki deadpanned at the same time. Why do you do this sheet to me? You never do things you don't want to do, Kaken, so I know you like it too, Deku said with a grin. What the F dash? He heard Kaminari whisper behind him, sounding honest-to-God distressed. Katsuki turned his head back to glare at him, but Deku piped up. One more thing, Kaken. What more could there ash? Katsuki cut himself off as soft lips were pressed against his cheek, and then Deku was racing off down the hill. Katsuki slapped a hand to his cheek and screeched. What the F-D? Gross. He rubbed the leftover spit off his burning face and glared at Deku's back as he ran across the grass, wanting to chase him but unable to or else he'd risk missing class. That BSRD. I'm not 5 years old anymore, he growled under his breath. The cheek kiss was a thing young Deku and Katsuki had picked up from their mothers. Though he wasn't planning on doing it when they were FANG 18. When he turned around, his face still felt flushed and his chest was all fluttery, but he set his face in stone. His friends were staring at him with 4 pair of wide eyes. Not FING word, he warned. Of course, they didn't listen. Is he your secret boyfriend or something? Mina squealed. What? Katsuki shrieked. No. Why would you think that? His face was bright red now. Oh, I don't know. Shiro said, throwing his hands up. He kissed you and survived? He laid on your lap and survived? Kaminari said. He made you smile like 50 times. Mina pointed out. You said only he could call you Kaken. Kirishima added to the list. You have a handshake. Rhyme thing. That's all friend sheet. Katsuki yelled in protest, whole body aflame in embarrassment. Sure, Bakugou. Izuku couldn't believe his luck. First, the school of his dreams accepted him, with a full-ride scholarship, no less, and he got to follow his friends and move back near his hometown, even without his stupid dad's stupid money. Then, of all things, he finds Kaken again. And Kaken recognized him. And said he missed him. When he first turned and met those ruby red eyes again for the first time in half a decade, he nearly choked on his own spit. Kaken's eyes widened, and Izuku's heart jumped in his chest, and before he knew it, his childhood instincts kicked in and he was ready for a fight. For an instant, Kaken didn't react, and Izuku nearly died of shame thinking that maybe his old best friend really had hated him all these years and hated him now. And then Kaken dropped his bag on the ground and twisted his lips into that old, manic smirk. After that, it was like the years apart hadn't happened at all. Except for the glaringly obvious fact that they did, because Kaken did not used to look like that. And by that, Izuku had no idea what he meant. There was the thing with Izuku having somehow grown taller than Kaken, which was very strange. He didn't feel taller, though, because Kaken just had that personality between the two of them. It was strangely cute when Kaken had to look up a bit to glare. Still intimidating as it always was, but cute. One thing Izuku did notice way too many times was just how strong Kaken looked. Izuku wouldn't have been surprised if he went to the gym every day of the week. He probably went with his friend with the crazy cool red hair, Kirishima. His muscles were completely unhidden by his black skull t-shirt, sleeves tight around thick biceps and broad shoulders. Izuku got the tiniest bit flustered just thinking about it. And he had thought he'd buffed up over the years. Another new thing about Kaken was that he apparently wore jewelry now. There were 2 rings on his big hands, one of which Izuku recognized as belonging to Uncle Masu, a thick, dark silver band. That one was around his ring finger on his right hand. The other ring was black with thin silver engravings of a vine-like design on his middle finger, left hand. Izuku couldn't help but notice him fiddling with them sometimes, slipping them off and on and twisting them around. Izuku didn't think Kaken was the type to fidget, but he never was very good at sitting still. Neither of them were. Izuku had been chided many a time about his incessant habit of tapping things and bouncing his legs, both by teachers and friends. Maybe it was something Kaken was doing to calm himself nowadays? Izuku had definitely noticed the whole deep breath thing Kaken had done after almost blowing up on Todoroki. It was nice to think that Kaken was trying to improve his temper, because no matter how used to it Izuku was or how immune to it, he knew how scary it used to be when Kaken got really mad. So, yeah, everything was different just as much as it was the same. And he was so happy about it. Giddy even. Midoriya? Izuku startled out of his thoughts and jolted upright in his seat, kicking out his legs and hitting his toes against the underbelly of the table with a bang. Ow! He yelped. His eyes found Tsuyu's concerned green ones. Sorry. Are you okay, Izuku? She asked, tilting her head and poking her cheek. Izuku couldn't get over how adorable his friend was. Yeah, you seem kinda out of it, Ochako said, leaning towards him across the table. Izuku and all his friends were gathered at a table in a campus lounge area, studying over lunch. Izuku had apparently gotten lost in thoughts about Kaken and his muscles and his jewelry and his hands and… Stop it! He shook his head like his brain was an etch-and-sketch and the thoughts would disappear. Sorry, he apologized again. Just thinking about some stuff. Todoroki studied him with his mismatched eyes. You look a little pink, Midoriya. Are you sick? Izuku resisted the urge to bury his face in his hands and melt into the floor. Was he that flustered just thinking about him? Maybe this childhood crush was not as far in the past as he thought it was. No, I'm okay. Thanks, Todoroki. Then what is distracting you from your studies? And you've hardly eaten your lunch. Ida told him, gesturing to his untouched bowl of curry. Curry, which was Kaken's favorite and maybe, no. It is unhealthy to skip meals, Midoriya. Ida lectured. I know, sorry. I'll eat, Izuku assured him, grabbing his spoon and taking a scoop of his curry that was probably already cold. Ochako looked at him with questioning brown eyes. Is it Bakugou? Izuku yelped again and dropped his spoon into the bowl, splattering curry across his open textbook and shirt, as well as some of his friend's homework. His eyes went wide. I'm so sorry. Let me just… He trailed off, face burning as he jumped up from his chair and raced to go get paper towels from the bathroom. When he returned, his face was still red and heart still fluttering from embarrassment, both about the mess and the question. He wiped up the mess, refusing to meet his friend's eyes. None of them said anything until he'd cleaned the curry off and thrown the paper towels in the trash. So, Ochako said, Bakugou. That was all she had to say before Izuku's face went back up in flame and he dropped his head down on the table, pretzeling his arms over his head like the ceiling was going to fall on him. He mumbled a bunch of incoherent things towards the floor and felt his friend's stares boring into his skull. Oh my gosh, Izuku! Ochako practically squealed. You have a crush on him. Izuku shot up in his seat then shrunk backwards. No, I don't. I just missed him. Ochako pointed an accusatory finger at him. Then why is your face all red? You know I'm easily embarrassed. Izuku cried, putting his hands out to block his face from view. I don't like Kaken like that. But you were thinking about him, right? Ochako says, and Izuku can hear the knowing smile in her voice. He put his hands back down and sighed. Okay, yeah, but I haven't seen him in 5 years. It's totally normal friend thoughts. Like how his hair ruffles in the wind and is still so soft or how it felt when Izuku kissed his cheek or his pretty red eyes or darn it. Stupid brain. It really seems like you have a crush, Izuku, said Tsuyu, watching him with her big, perceptive eyes. I don't have a crush on Kaken anymore. Izuku shouted, then slapped his hands over his mouth. He hadn't meant to add the last part or be that loud. He curled in on himself in the chair as his friends blinked in surprise. Anymore? Ochako echoed, quirking an eyebrow up. Meaning you used to? Izuku buried his face in his hands. Maybe a little, he mumbled. It was a lie. He always adored Kaken, and then the teenage feelings exploded, and he might even say he was a step down from in love. Utterly enamored could describe it best. He hadn't had a crush on anyone else, even after leaving Mustafa. But those feelings were gone now, and he and Kaken could go back to being friends. Is that why you kissed him? Tsuyu asked, interrupting his thoughts. He jolted his head up to look at her with wide eyes. No. We've been doing that since forever, it's not like that. And the whole head in the lap thing? Izuku blushed harder. Again, just a thing we do. Wait, I'm lost, Todoroki said with a frown. I've never been good at this kind of thing, but does Midoriya have a crush on Bakugou, or are they dating? Or was it both? I can't seem to understand. The last sentence was drowned out by Izuku near shriek as he jumped to his feet. I am not dating Kaken. Todoroki looked slightly taken aback by Izuku's reaction. I am sorry to offend, I misunderstood. My fault. Izuku sighed and slumped into his chair. Sorry, Todoroki, that was rude. You didn't know. Izuku knew just as much as anyone at that table the reasons Todoroki didn't understand things like dating or crushes, or even most jokes. His childhood hadn't exactly been full of the normal kind of love, except maybe from his siblings. But no, Kaken and I are not dating. I don't have a crush on him either. Todoroki nodded slowly, and there was a sudden buzz from Izuku's phone on the table. It was face-up, meaning all of his friends saw the notification pop up from Kaken. Laughing face. The higher powers were probably cackling the sky about this timing. Izuku scrambled to snatch his phone away from sight and hugged it to his chest. His friends stared at him, and Ochako had an eyebrow raised with a hint of a smirk. He huffed at her, then looked to see what Kaken had said despite knowing that was exactly what Ochako wanted him to do. Kaken! Laughing face. Do you have classes yet? Izuku didn't know why he'd ask that, but he was just glad Kaken was texting him anyways. My first class is Monday. So no. Okay, then you can come to this party later. Izuku's heart skipped a beat. A party? That Kaken was inviting him to? What did that mean? Party? Yeah, FING party. The dumbass brigade is dragging me along and I don't want to go. Since when do you do things you don't want to do? Since effing therapy and friendship bullshit. So Izuku had been right, Kaken was trying to improve. Therapy was more than Izuku had even thought of, but he was elated for his friend. So are you coming or what, Deku? Why are you inviting me again? Dumbass, are you FING kidding me? Oh my god. Because I FING want you there? And if you are, then I can escape the mayhem of the idiots. Izuku was definitely blushing now. Because I want you there? Okay then. Not that we don't create our own mayhem. I like our mayhem better than theirs. Oh, and you can invite your extras if you want, I guess. Frog Girl seemed chill and am 90% sure Dunce Face has a crush on Round Face, so he wants her there. Though I can't promise I won't kick Halfsy's teeth in if he speaks to me. Kaken, why? And tell whoever Dunce Face is that Ochako is taken. I do what I want, Deku, and that BS Deep sees me off. By who? He's actually very nice, Kaken, just a little monotone. He has his reasons. And she's been dating Tsu for 6 months. They're very cute, laughing face. Would that be Frog Girl? Good for them, I guess. Frog Girl? She looks like cute little frog, Deku, Sumi. Izuku let out a tiny, audible giggle at that, glancing up at Tsuyu, who had gone back to her studies. She did kind of look like a frog. And it was nice to hear Kaken call something cute instead of just complaining about everything. Okie dokie, Kaken. I'll ask if they want to go. Oh, and yes, I'll come. Wait, I already said that. Here's the address, it starts at 7 tonight. See you then. Laughing face. Yeah, okay, nerd. Izuku put his phone down with a dopey smile. He was going to see Kaken again. Kaken wanted to hang out. He guessed he shouldn't be so surprised, knowing what happened last time they met, but still. After 5 years of radio static, it was nice to know Kaken was still his friend. Whatcha smiling about? Ochako said, leaning towards him with a look and waggling her eyebrows. Stop that, he frowned at her. but the smile broke through again. Kakin invited me to party tonight and said you all could come too. Want to? A party? Ida repeated, sounding faintly scandalized. But this is school. Ida, people can have parties if they want, Ochako said. Sounds like fun. Want to go, Tsu? Tsuyu poked her cheek and smiled at her girlfriend. Sure. Yay. Ochako cheered, giving Tsuyu a peck on the cheek. Are you saying that Bakugou is a partier, Midoriya? Does he drink too much? Ida frowned, staring Izuku down. What? No. Izuku wasn't 100% sure on that, but he knew Kakin. He's not that kind of person at all. He's actually very antisocial. I think his friends are trying to make him do stuff like this to stop him from being a hermit. Bakugou a hermit? Tsuyu tilted her head. Doesn't seem like the type. Oh, he definitely is, Izuku said, smiling a bit. He doesn't see the need for things that aren't studying and his rigorous exercise regiment. Oh no. Wrong thing to say. Wrong thing to think about. Stop thinking about Kakin's arms. Wait, hasn't it been like 5 years since you saw each other? Ochako asked. How do you know he's still like that? Izuku tapped his chin with his finger. Well, I know Kakin. He's not exactly big on change. Izuku thought back to the time Auntie Mitsuki had signed 6-year-old Kakin up for drum lessons, as an outlet for his bratty rage, as she put it, and they were at the same time that Kakin usually had outdoors time. He threw quite the fit. The drums did work as a pretty good outlet for that. Izuku briefly wondered if Kakin still played, then kept talking before he could go down that rabbit hole. And the whole drinking thing? His health is super important to him, so I doubt he's getting drunk at 18. Kakin used to yell at him for eating too many processed foods from the konbini. Izuku always thought it was sweet that he cared. Ida made a HM noise, crossing his arms. I might stop by to make sure you are being responsible, but I have to study for a test tonight and get good rest for tomorrow. Ida, Ochako whined, it's Friday. You can stay up a little later. I said I might stop by, Ida concluded. Ochako gave up on him and turned to Todoroki. What about you, Todoroki? I do not think Bakugou likes me very much. That's not true. Izuku protested. His friends all gave him looks. Okay, maybe it's a little true, but that's just how he is. Besides, his friends will be there, and they liked you. Did Bakugou say he wanted me there? Izuku paused, thinking about Kakin's text. I can't promise I won't kick Hafsi's teeth in if he speaks to me. He didn't say he didn't want you there. Ochako sighed at him, then turned to Todoroki. Come on, to do. You gotta come, it's part of the college experience. When Todoroki didn't react, she leaned across the table and met his eyes. Your dad would probably hate it if you went. I'll be there, was the immediate response. Ochako jumped up and clapped her hands excitedly. Party time. When is it? 7 p.m., Izuku answered. Ochako got an excited sparkle in her eye that for some reason made Izuku want to run. We gotta get Izuku dressed up. It. He spluttered, jolting back. Why? Because you have been invited to a party by your not crush and, she trailed off with a sigh. Izuku, you know I love you, but your fashion sense? Not so much right now. Izuku clutched a hand to his chest like he was protecting his shirt. It was a green one that said, suit and on the front. What's wrong with my clothes? Nothing. Except that you're not getting a man like that, Ochako said with a grin. I'm not looking for a man. Izuku squawked. Or a lady, but I'm pretty sure you're leaning towards a man right now. Ochako shrugged. I'm not looking for either. Izuku said, his voice high-pitched and cracking like he was a 15-year-old again. Ochako waved her hand at him. Fine. But my point still stands. It's a party, mix it up a little. Izuku could tell this was an argument he wasn't going to win. Okay, I give up. You can do your thing. Ochako grinned. Don't make it sound like a death sentence. This'll be fun. 1 hour of Ochako insulting everything in his wardrobe, 3 hours of forced shopping, 34 minutes of trying and failing to tame his hair, and 52 minutes of nervous pacing later, Izuku and his friends pulled up to the front lawn of an enormous house. They'd all piled into Todoroki's very fancy car that Izuku could never remember the name of, but always felt scared to touch. His father had given it to him, possibly to attempt to make Todoroki stop hating him, but it was highly unlikely that was ever going to happen. Izuku and all his friends had already made the resolution that if they ever saw the man in person it would be a fist to nose or knee to the groin on sight. Even Tsuyu, arguably the least impulsive and most rational person in the group. Getting out of the swanky car, 2000-something, Izuku gaped up at the building in front of him. It was bigger and fancier than even Kaken's childhood home, which was saying something. The huge mahogany double doors were at the top of sleek concrete steps, and the house was made of old bricks with ivy growing up the walls. Not crazy, overgrown ivy, but the kind of ivy that someone obviously pays someone else a lot of money to trim and preen every week. He was insanely nervous to go inside, especially feeling so weird in the clothes Ochako had coerced him into wearing. The jeans were normal wide blue jeans with rips at the knees. It's fashionable, Izuku, and he'd cinched them at the waist with a long, vintage, blue all-might belt with the yellow V adorned on the buckle. It was possibly one of the nerdiest things he owned, but it was the only way he was going to go along with Ochako's outrageous request of his shirt. It was white, with short sleeves that barely covered his shoulders, and it was tighter than any other shirt Izuku had ever worn. Show off those guns. Maybe that didn't sound too crazy, but the non-baggy shirt was very new to him, and the super short sleeves meant the black band he used to protect and cover the scar on his left arm was totally visible. Ochako and Tsuyu assured him it looked like he had funky taste in shirts at worst and badass at best, and that most likely nobody would care. He'd go with the first option if he were placing bets. Because of all these nerves writhing around in his gut, he elected to text Kaken to come meet them outside instead of going in unprepared and unaware. Kaken. Laughing face. Are you sure you invited me to a party and not the intro to a horror movie? Or is this a prank and I'm gonna get arrested for attempting to break into someone's mansion? Very funny, Deku. I'll be right out, let me escape the idiots. Izuku smiled and pocketed his phone, letting his friends know that Kaken was going to come meet them. Soon enough, the heavy mahogany doors swung open and Kaken sauntered out onto the porch, looking down at his phone. Izuku's breath caught in his throat at the sight. Kaken had on a black bomber jacket with orange bands of color around the bicep area and what looked like silver studs on the shoulders, and Izuku thought he looked like the old pictures of auntie and uncle that he remembered being shown to them when they were around 10. Maybe he'd even gotten the jacket from one of his fashion designer parents. His skinny black jeans were ripped up and down, maybe it was fashionable Ochako, and he still had his signature heavy black boots. Underneath the jacket was a dark gray top with a big orange X crossing over the center. His hair was still the same perfectly tousled spikes of ash blonde. But what shocked Izuku the most was that, as Kaken approached, it became increasingly obvious that he was wearing sharp eyeliner and that he was hot as hell. Sheet, no, friendship thoughts only, Izuku. Hey, Kaken. He managed out with a normal voice. At least, he hoped it sounded normal. His heart felt like a panicking percussion section in his chest, and then Kaken looked up from his phone and met his eyes. The red eyes went wider, then slowly made their way up and down as Kaken closed the distance between them. Kaken came to a stop in front of him, mouth open slightly, still staring. Izuku felt like the fiery red was melting him into the grass. Did he really look that weird? Kaken finally started to say, then stopped. He breathed. What the hell are you wearing? Izuku fiddled his hands nervously behind his back. What kind of reaction was that? Apparently, Ochako had failed in whatever she was trying to do. Well, Izuku stuttered. Ochako told me I wasn't allowed to be dressed like I normally do because this is a real college party, or something, he said, making air quotes around real college party. Kaken was still staring. I know, I can't exactly pull it off, but it's a little late to change, he said, with what he hoped was a natural laugh and shrug at the end. Kaken jolted up to meet his eyes. No, you look. Kaken broke the eye contact again. He was acting very strange. Suddenly, Kaken squinted at his waist. Is that a FING all-might belt? Oh. Izuku squeaked, looking down at the old belt. Yes. Katsuki let out a snort of laughter and looked up at him, apparently returned to normal. I'm glad to know you're still a giant FNG nerd, Deku. As if you don't have just as much merch as I do, Izuku retorted, glad for the break in the tension. If I do, that's no one's business but my own. At least I don't flaunt the sheet. Are you trying to get your butt kicked again? Kaken gave him a look, one eyebrow quirked up and sheet. Izuku couldn't get over the eyeliner. 3 things, nerd. 1, just FNG say but. 2, the F, do you mean by again? And 3, I wouldn't want to get your one non-horrendous shirt all dirty, now would I? Round Cheeks has done the world a great service today. Izuku felt a blush rise on his cheeks despite that very much not a compliment. Sure. Izuku, are we going to stand out here while you flirt or actually get to the party? Ochako suddenly called from behind him. Izuku's eyes went wide and he whirled around. What? He and Kaken yelped at the same time. Ochako smiled and winked at him. Nothing, it's just getting cold out here, she said casually, wrapping an arm Tsuyu and pulling her girlfriend closer. Hello again, Bakugou by the way. And you're welcome. You're W-fur, what the hell are you on about? Kaken snapped. Ochako didn't respond, just grinned wider and wiggled her eyebrows a bit. Izuku's mind was still reeling. Flirting? With Kaken? No way. If that was flirting, they've been flirting since they were 11. Hello, Bakugou, Todoroki said, stepping forward. Good to see you again. Kaken looked him up and down, scowling. Half-see. Izuku startled out of his mind and moved to stop Kaken from insulting his friend further, but he was too late. You know, I told Deku he could invite you thinking you'd have a stick too far up your butt to come. Kaken, Izuku started. I don't usually come to parties, no, but I hear it will piss my old man off, Todoroki monotones. And he is an a-hole, so I'm always up for that. Kaken's eyes widened a bit, then he smirked and barked a laugh. Maybe you're not too bad, half and half. Todoroki almost smiled at that, the corners of his lips twitching up. It was about as close to a smile Todoroki got most of the time. Kaken turned and motioned for them to follow as he heads back to the house. Come on, Deku and others, let's get to this FING shitshow before Bubblegum Girl comes looking for me. When they enter the house, Izuku is immediately hit by how loud the music is. He physically flinches backwards at the shock, but slowly gets used to it. He struggled a bit to keep up as Kaken darts and weaves between other guests, and they finally emerge in a living room. There are people lounging everywhere, drinking from plastic cups and eating food and talking. He easily spots Ishido's bright pink hair next to Kaminari's bright yellow and Kirishima's bright red. Man, Kaken had some colorful friends. With colorful personalities too. Hey there, cuties. Ishido called, waving her hand way up in the air from her perch on the back of the couch. Glad you made it. Hi, Mina. Ochako chirps, leaning in to give her friend a one-armed side hug. Ochako and Ishido share a class or two and were the whole reason Izuku was able to reconnect with Kaken. Speaking of Kaken, he seemed to be having a silent argument with Kirishima, Kaminari, and Shiro. The 3 boys are all grinning at him, and Izuku thinks he sees a couple gazes thrown his way. Kaken was glaring at them with malice, and his cheeks looked slightly red. Once again very weird. Oh, Midoriya. Ishido sings, taking his gaze away from Kaken. Don't you look all fancy tonight? I like it. Izuku feels the embarrassed heat creep up from his neck. Thank you, Ishido. Why did everyone care about his outfit? He was far from the most eccentric of the 2 friend groups. Ishido herself was wearing a bright neon teal and purple mini dress and white heels that looked like foot torture. Izuku should know, he'd tried on his mother and friends' heels before. Ochako picked it all out, I can't take responsibility for any of it. Nonsense, you picked the belt. Izuku heard Kaken snort again and rolled his eyes as he blushed. Sorry, Ochako, I won't blame you for the belt. That's all me. In all your nerdy effing glory, Kaken added, patting him on the shoulder. His ring feels slightly cold against the apparently very thin sleeves of Izuku's shirt. What's the armband all about? Kaminari asks, making Izuku's heart rate spike and eyes go wide. That wasn't supposed to happen. Some kind of club thing? Or is it fashion? Bakugou, your parents are fashion people, right? Is that a trend? Kaken gives him a look, and Izuku can immediately hear the unspoken "Am I lying for you with this?" in his eyes. His heart warms and calms at the reassurance that Kaken would be there for him even without knowing what was going on, but he shakes his head no. No, it's not a fashion thing, Izuku explains. It's a medical thing. Kaminari's mouth fell open slightly and Ishido reached out to bat his shoulder. Sorry, he said, none of my business, then. Oh, I don't mind, Izuku told him, shrugging. It wasn't like he was self-conscious about the scars, nor did he regret the ways he got them, but it could turn a bit embarrassing. It's just to cover a scar. One of many, that is. Izuku held up his scarred arms and hands, then performed an exaggerated shrug. He sensed Kaken's eyes on him and turned to see concern in the red. Kaken met his gaze and narrowed those eyes, and then his hand was around Izuku's wrist and he was being dragged away. Whoa? Kaken, what are you doing? Izuku yelped. Talk, was all the answer he got. He decided it was best not to resist as Kaken pulled him through the crowd and into an empty bathroom, kicking the door shut behind them. Izuku stood in front of the bath as Kaken stared him down from in front of the closed door. And yes, it was somehow staring him down, no matter Izuku's height advantage. Suddenly, Kaken drew in a deep breath, drawing his shoulders up, and let it out as a harsh stream of air as he fiddled with Uncle Masaru's ring. Look, Deku, you don't have to explain all the way, but you're okay, right? With the scars and sheet. The utter sincerity in his voice and expression nearly knocks Izuku off his feet. Oh, I'm okay. Sorry to worry you. Kaken purses his lips and Izuku can practically feel the way his eyes rake up and down the mess on his arms. I just dash. Kaken let out another huff and crossed his arms across his chest. Izuku had never seen him this, unsure of himself. You worry me a hole. You have never had any self-preservation, so coming back with all that, Kaken waved a hand up and down, trying to encapsulate the scars, it makes me think some things. I mean your effing hands, Deku. Izuku looked down at his rough, scarred palms and fingers. Kaken was his best friend. He doesn't hide things from Kaken. The only consequences of telling him was probably getting scolded. Izuku sighed and met his friend's eye. Okay, Kaken, the truth is that dash. Don't tell if you don't want to, I'm not trying to force sheet here, Kaken interrupted. Izuku smiled at him. No, I want to tell you. You're Kaken, I don't keep secrets from you. Except maybe one, but the crush is a different situation. Anyways, the truth is that there were some not great people at my high school. You know the kind. Kaken flinches, just barely, and Izuku suddenly remembers that Kaken could possibly think he should be put in that category. Not like that, I mean actually horrible people. They beat kids up, badly, behind the school, for fun. Izuku's blood starts boiling and he clenches his fists just thinking about it. Deku, Kaken growls, low and dangerous, and Izuku's heart does not know how to react to that sound. Are you saying these motherfuckers gave you those scars? Because I swear. He trails off, and Izuku feels like that sentence would end with something about hunting them down for sport and murder. No, they didn't. Well, kind of. Rage burns in Kaken's eyes, but Izuku can't help a tiny smile. It was a bit of a two-way street. Kaken blinks in surprise, rage melting to confusion. What? They pushed me around a bit for the first few months, nothing too bad. But there were a couple kids, they really did a number on. A lot. And one day I walked by an empty alleyway and saw them with this one poor kid. Izuku blanches, remembering. I don't know, lost control? Anyways, when I woke up, I had some new. Izuku looks down at his arms, you know. He looks back up. The assholes got expelled, and I got a week of suspension that I spent in the hospital. I feel terrible for hurting people, but I was defending someone else and myself. I don't regret it. Kaken is just staring at him blankly. Abruptly, he turns to the door and slams his forehead against it with a bang. Izuku jumps at the noise. Kaken? He squeaked. What the F dash, Deku? Kaken yelled to the door. Slumping against it. I can't even effing what the F dash. Holy shit. I'm going to kill you. What the F dash? You are insane, and I am going to kill you. Holy F a sheet, why would you do that? He's rambling now, which feels wrong. Izuku is always the rambling one. He doesn't know how to deal with the other side. Kaken, take a breath, he tried. Kaken whirls around and stomps up to him like impending doom. Oh, no. That did not work. Izuku scrambles back until he's pressed against the lip of the bathtub, leaning away from Kaken's fist that he's waving in his face. I will not You fucker! He screamed, probably scaring people outside of the bathroom. Christ, I leave you alone for a couple years and you go off and nearly get killed. Were you even thinking? No, Izuku snapped, alarmed at his own burst of courage. But it doesn't matter because I wasn't going to sit around and do nothing. I'm never going to do that. And that's why you're going to keep scaring the shit out of me for the rest of my life, right? Kaken has leaned away from him now, shoulders slumped and voice cracking with emotion. This is all very new, and all very not Kaken, and Izuku feels like they're both going to cry. Kaken lets out a shaky sigh, rubbing a face over his hand, then looks up to lock eyes with Izuku. His crimson eyes are full of pain? Izuku can't tell, but it hurts to look at. Slowly, Kaken sheds his bomber, dropping it to the floor, and lifts up the bottom of his tank top. An old, pale, scrape of a scar is revealed on his left side. You FNG remember this sheet, Deku? He asked quietly. Deku stares at the scar, unable to hold back his tears now, and nods. When they were 8, chasing each other up and down the sidewalk, Izuku had spotted an injured bird in the middle of the road. He had run right towards it to help, not paying attention to the surroundings. 1 second, he was making his way towards the poor bird. The next he was on his back on top of a screaming Kaken as a car sped by in a blur, horn blaring. Kaken had managed to yank them out of the way just in time, but Izuku's weight had sent him skidding across the rough concrete and cut him up. They sat there on the side of the road for probably half an hour, Izuku sobbing apologies as Kaken chided him to stop and held back his own tears. AFING bird. You nearly died because of FING bird. Because for some reason you were born caring about every little thing on the entire goddamn earth. Kaken took in a shaky breath. And to the people who care about you, it is the scariest FING sheet in the world, because you care for everything but your DMN self. So you telling me that sheet? I have 2 things to say to you. Kaken glared up at him. You, and I am never letting you leave again. Izuku felt like the ground under him collapsed into a mudslide, and he burst into sobs, throwing himself at Kaken and gripping him tightly. After a moment, Kaken hugged him. Back for real for the first time since they were 5. It made Izuku sob even harder. Goddamn self-sacrificial a-hole, Kaken mumbled into his shirt. You are so effing lucky I've been to therapy for so long or you would be dead meat right now. Izuku hiccups another sob mixed with a laugh and squeezes Kaken tighter. I'm sorry, Kaken, he whispered. The hands on his back clench, gathering his shirt in fists. Don't say that, idiot. You don't have anything to be effing sorry for, just keep your head in the future, okay? Okay, Izuku sniffles as they both pull away. He presses their foreheads like Kaken used to do whenever he cried, breathing in a deep, cool breath of caramel mixed with sticky sugar. It's the smell of Kaken, and he didn't realize how much he missed it until now. Without thinking, he made a little happy hum. What? Kaken asked, noticing the noise. Oh, Izuku said, cheeks feeling warm. Well, you smell like burnt sugar and kind of candy maybe, and you always used to smell like that and it's a really nice smell, I guess I just missed it? Wait, no, that's a really weird thing to say, I don't, smell you all the time, that's creepy, and oh man, I really shouldn't have brought this up dash. Izuku was quickly becoming flustered by all the words coming out of his mouth and the weight of the conversation they just had and the fact that they're still so close and he's starting to overheat. He felt a pinch on his cheek, making him blink in surprise. Shut up, it's fine, Kaken said, standing upright and brining their foreheads apart. He looks slightly to the right of Izuku's eyes. You, smell good too, I guess. Like mint. It's obnoxious as F dash dot. Izuku's heart goes right back to fluttering around in his chest. Oh. Cool. Kaken still doesn't meet his eyes, almost like he's embarrassed. Since when does Kaken get embarrassed? I like your eyeliner, Izuku suddenly blurts. He is on fire. He has to be on literal fire from how much his face is burning. Kaken's eyes went a little wide, then he finally made eye contact again with a hint of his snarky grin. Thanks, Mina forced it upon me one day in second year and I looked badass as F-, so I kept doing it. Now that was the cocky, confident Kaken Izuku knew and was used to. You look badass all the time, Kaken, Izuku told him. Hell yeah, I do. Kaken was now grinning his full smug smile, though his cheeks looked a little pink. We should probably go back to the party, right? Kaken looked almost disappointed as he leaned down to grab his bomber jacket and tie it around his waist. Yeah, those fuckers might start getting ideas. He turned to open the door. What kind of ideas? Izuku asked as they entered the mostly empty hall. Well, they could always start drinking too much and do some stupid shit that causes injury to destruction of property, Kaken said, making his way towards the room they left their friends in. Which has happened before because, as I said, idiots. Izuku chuckled a bit at that and they finally made it to the living room. Their friends all turned to look at them. Or, Kaken continued, they could do the stupid shit they're about to do. What is in it though? Izuku had to fight of the instinct to run when he saw Ochako's grin, or the looks Kaken was getting from his four friends. So, Ashido sing-songed, swaying back and forth from her perch on the couch. Where did you boys run off to for so long? There was an undeniable air to her voice that suggested she had very specific, very incorrect ideas of what they had done. Do anything interesting? Ochako added, smiling. Izuku couldn't believe this. Ochako was his best friend. How could she not tell that he had literally come back from sobbing in the bathroom? He knew for a fact he looked very messy after crying, though maybe they were assuming that was because of something else. He couldn't even think that whole thought without fainting. Kaken growled beside him, making his heart jump. Shut the F up, he snapped. Suddenly, Tsuyu was in front of Izuku, speaking quietly. Are you okay, Izuku? Do you need to leave? Of course, Tsuyu always knew when something was up. She glanced over at Kaken, who was still glaring at his friends, then back to Izuku. Izuku's eyes went wide and he quickly shook his hands in front of himself. Oh no. No, it wasn't like that, or like that, Izuku assured her, not really sure what he meant by the second part. Thank you for asking though. Kaken and I just talked about something. He smiled at her softly. Tsuyu was such a wonderful friend, he was lucky to have her. All good. Really good. She tilted her head, then smiled back and nodded. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. What the hell are you implying, sheet face? Izuku heard Kaken snarl, leering over his friends on the couch. Excuse me, he told Tsuyu, before making his way to Kaken's side to pull him back before he killed a friend. Kaken was extra grumpy and full of rage after he went through something emotional. Sometimes while he went through something emotional. We weren't implying anything. Siro said, holding up his hands to show his innocence, though his smile said differently. And dog food tastes like Skittles. Izuku and Kaken deadpanned at the same time. They both started and gave each other a look, then Izuku burst out laughing for no particular reason. And then he heard a familiar, long-lost giggle beside him and nearly fell over. Kaken was laughing for real. His real laugh that he'd been hiding since kindergarten. His light, airy giggle that sometimes dissolved into a snort, or even a squeal if he was really in it. Izuku's heart stopped beating for a second at the sound, and then he looked over and his world came to a screeching halt. He forgot how to breathe. Kaken had his eyes closed, his mouth an open grin to show off his teeth and natural smile, his hair messy and falling over his face as his nose and corners of his eyes crinkled up with the laughter. Everything was in slow motion, and then suddenly it wasn't, and Kaken clapped a hand over his shoulder and shoved him back a little, not letting go as the world came crashing back into a view in a blur around him. Kaken was the only thing Izuku could clearly see. I can't believe you effing remember that. He laughed, opening his ruby-red eyes again, still smiling his real smile. Izuku felt giddy. Of course I remember. When they were young, an older cousin of Kaken's had convinced that the food they fed their family dog tasted exactly like, well, Skittles. They tried it, and after Kaken had raged and tackled his cousin to the ground as Izuku cried and chugged water in the background, they were let in on the family tradition, Izuku as an honorary Bakugou. It was, of course, a tradition from Auntie's side of the family. It had also become a bit of an inside joke, a way to call bullshit on somebody. Apparently, both him and Kaken had kept using it over the years. Midoriya, Kirishima said abruptly from his seat, eyes wide as he sat up and leaned towards them over the back of the couch with an open-mouthed smile. Do that again. Do what? Izuku asked, confused. I don't know what you did, just do it again. What the F, are you saying, shitty hair? Kaken snapped. Are you drunk? I didn't think so, but I think I might be hallucinating, so maybe. I need Midoriya to do the thing again to be sure. Yeah, me too, Kaminari said from beside him. Siro nodded. Same here, Ashido chimed in. All four of them looked something between starstruck, shocked, and amused. What thing? Izuku asked, even more lost. Finally, Kirishima leaned in towards him. Make him laugh again so I'm sure that I heard that right. What? Izuku squeaked, drowned out by Kaken's indignant yell of, what the F dash? He giggled. Ashido squealed, leaning so far back Izuku was worried she would fall. Blasty McDarkness giggled. Shut the F up, you bubblegum-brained idiot. Kaken screeched, face turning red in a way that Izuku found almost endearing. It was a weird thought to have. I will end your F bloodlines. Bakugou giggles. Ashido repeated as her friends laughed beside her. I have known you for so long and I never knew you giggled. It's adorable. Kaken in a huge breath of air, shoulders inching up to his ears, and Izuku panicked. There were other people in here. Kaken could not blow up right now, no matter how cute and flustered he was about his amazing laugh. In a flash of instincts, without much thought behind his actions or what could follow, he grabbed Kaken's hand, interlaced their fingers, and squeezed. Kaken's eyes went wider than Izuku had ever seen them, and he froze, whatever profanities he was about to scream dying on his lips. What the hell are you doing, Deku? He growled quietly. Izuku didn't really have an answer for that, so he let the childhood take control of his body again. Before he knew what was happening, he leaned down to plant a quick kiss on Kaken's bare shoulder, let go of his hand, and bolted. He heard Kaken yell and didn't have to turn to know he was following him as he dashed through surprised people and yelped out his apologies, making a break for the mahogany front doors. He threw them open with a grunt of effort and took off down the concrete steps, skidding to a stop on the grass outside. He spun around just as Kaken lunged at him, and barely twisted out of his way before he was smushed into the ground. Instead, Kaken got to his legs and toppled him from there. While attempting to scramble away, he realized that he really did not think this through, and then suddenly he felt giggles bubbling in his chest and burst out laughing. Kaken glared at him, but his lips quirked into the beginnings of a smile. You think this ain't funny? He growled, the smile creeping into his voice. Izuku giggled even more. Kinda, he managed, pushing himself up on his feet, still squatting down. Kaken broke into a full grin, a mix between his manic fight smile and his real one, and jumped at him again. He slammed Izuku back into the grass and pinned him with a knee to the chest, but Izuku threw his arms around Kaken's neck and used all his weight to wrench them both sideways. They grappled around on their sides for a second until Kaken managed to get a boot on Izuku's chest and shove him backwards and onto his back, wheezing. Kaken took advantage of his moment to catch his breath and landed on top of him, hands wrapped around his biceps, pressing him to the ground. Izuku's eyes went wide with the pressure around his scar, and he let out a tiny yelp. Ow! In a flash, Kaken was reeling back and off of him, hands up, looking worried and apologetic. Izuku smiled at his friend, but he wasn't done yet. He grabbed a handful of grass, sat up, threw it, and lunged at Kaken, taking him by surprise and slamming him back into the ground, hands pinning his wrists as he straddled his waist and held his legs down with his feet. 1 2 3 4 5. He rattled off way too fast, panting heavily. I win. Katsuki spat the grass out of his mouth, eyes squeezed shut, the weight of Deku on his stomach much heavier than he thought it would be. How dare that little fucker mess with him like that? He'd thought he'd actually hurt him. F you! He shouted, opening his eyes to glare. That was he suddenly trailed off, insults totally forgotten. Cheating. He managed, more like a breath than a word. Deku was above him, caging him between lean muscled arms, green hair wild and sticking up in all directions, panting with a grin. His fitted white shirt was smeared with dirt and grass stains, and part of it had come untucked from his jeans, exposing a triangle of skin above his belt. His freckled face was shining in the moonlight with a light sheen of sweat, and his emerald eyes sparkled. He looked Katsuki couldn't put it into words. Or maybe he didn't want to out of fear of what those words would be. What? Deku panted, tightening his head a bit so a strand of hair fell in front of his eye. His eyelashes fluttered and he tried to blow it off, crinkling up his nose as he did. Katsuki's heart did a hard rock drum solo in his chest, flopped around like a suffocating fish, and promptly died. He forgot how to breathe. Kaken? Oh no, are you concussed or something? Deku asked, concerned and cute and hot and Deku leaned toward him, squinting at his face like that would let him know if Katsuki had a concussion. Katsuki's face went up in flame and he jolted upright, slamming their foreheads together and knocking Deku back. Kaken! He was still straddling Katsuki's waist, holding a hand on his forehead as he cringed in pain. Katsuki felt a bit of guilt rise in his chest with all the other stupid feelings and he tried to keep himself calm instead of lashing out. He counted down from 10 in his head and took a deep breath. Hey Katsuki, say it. This is a small thing, the therapist said to start small. Just say it. Sorry, he finally managed. Deku's green eyes went wide as dinner plates and his mouth fell open, hand dropping off his head. Oh, he blinked at Katsuki. Katsuki felt more guilt tighten around his heart. Had he really been so bad that a single sorry elicited that reaction? Yes he had. Then, out of nowhere, Deku broke into a sunny grin. It's okay. Katsuki shook his head slightly to snap himself out of the Deku smile trance. Whatever, he'd sked, cheating a-hole. Deku shrugged and kept smiling. I didn't cheat. Totally fair fight. He held out a hand and made a grabby motion. Now give. Katsuki growled at him. I obviously don't have any effing on me, nerd. Then you have 5 minutes to find some. Izuku, said a voice from behind them, very loudly. They both startled and Deku jumped and scrambled off of Katsuki's lap. Uraraka stalked up to them, hands on her hips. Bakugou, look at what you did, she whined, gesturing to Deku's dirt-stained shirt. There was even a slight boot imprint on his chest. I worked so hard for that. He started it, Katsuki said, sounding like a whiny toddler. I did not. Deku protested. I finished it, though, by winning. Because you cheated. No, I didn't. You just lost. Katsuki lunged at him and they were once again grappling around on the grass. Then, something terrible happened. As they wrestled, Katsuki ended up above Deku, and for an instant, their eyes caught. Something overcame Katsuki and he felt like the glittering green was swallowing him whole. He froze up. Deku was able to flip them both over easily and pin him back down, and suddenly he was in the same position he was in a few minutes ago, staring up, starstruck, at what was probably the most beautiful person in the world. Motherfucker. Got you again. Deku laughed, unaware that Katsuki was going through a FING crisis right now. He'd practically let Deku do this again. What the hell was wrong with him? His stomach felt like someone shook up a bunch of butterflies in champagne and let the cork pop. The heat in his neck crept up to his cheeks. He was sweating. How do you breathe? F dash. Is this some form of silent communication or are they just? Kirishima suddenly said, trailing off before he finished. With a start, Katsuki realized he and Deku had just been lying there on the grass, staring at each other. Deku's eyes widened and he jumped off again as Katsuki sat up and scrambled back, glaring at all their friends that had apparently come outside to watch them. Shitty hair. Oh, sorry, did I interrupt something there? Kirishima said with a raised eyebrow and insufferable teasing smirk. Before Katsuki could yell at him, Deku leaned into his side. Your 5 minutes are running out, Kaken. Katsuki's eyes widened at the closeness and the warning, and he jumped to his feet. Huda, wait right here. He took off running back into the house and searched the kitchen for anything candy-like. Finally, he found a bowl with a bunch of mini candies in it and grabbed 2 packs of Skittles with a grin. He ran back outside to find Deku on his feet again and slammed the packs into his scarred hand. There, have some FNG dog food. Deku stared down at the candy and broke into giggles. The noise sent fizzes through Katsuki's body. What the hell? Thanks, Kaken. Guess you can keep your shoes? He gave Katsuki a look, for now. He giggled again and tossed Katsuki a Skittles pack before tearing the one he kept open and dumping it into his hand. Don't tell me you still do that, Katsuki said, laughter creeping up from inside. Are you saying you don't? Deku said, not looking up from the Skittles he was sorting into color piles on his scarred palm. Katsuki pursed his lips. He definitely still did, he just never told anybody why. But whatever, this was Deku. Fine. He ripped open his own Skittles and sorted the colors, then carefully put all the green ones in his other hand. He then exchanged the green Skittles for Deku's handful of orange. Deku smiled at him, holding out his fistful of candy. Katsuki rolled his eyes and bumped their fists together like they were clinking cups, and then started eating the Skittles. In the middle of chewing, he caught Deku's eye, and suddenly they were both doubled over and giggling. And he hated that he was giggling right now at 18 years old, in front of his friends that he had managed to hide it from for 4 years, but he couldn't stop. Not with Deku around. Even when he heard Kaminari whisper, he's doing it again, he couldn't stop. Because Deku was back and he was here, and he remembered the dog food and the way they had to eat colored candies and all of it. Kaken. Deku giggled, making his heart go crazy. You remembered. Of FANG course, nerd, Katsuki said, bumping their shoulders. I never ate a green piece of candy. He leaned over and lowered his voice so their friends wouldn't hear. I swear on all might. Deku beamed at him. No orange stuff here either. It was another childhood rule. If there was ever candy that had green or orange in it, Katsuki always got the orange and Deku got the green. Especially with Skittles because the other 3 colors of Skittles were all might colors, if you counted purple as blue. Is that why you never eat the green mandames? Kaminari asked. And why you never eat orange candy, Izuku? Tsuyu added. Deku shrugs and Katsuki flips his smiling friends off. The rest of the night passes by quickly after that, and Katsuki can't stop watching Deku smile and laugh just exist in the vicinity. Every time he sees him it's like everything else kind of blurs around him, and Katsuki has never been more confused. Before he knows it, it's almost midnight and they all stumble out the doors and into the cool night air. Well, everyone but Katsuki, Deku, and the frog girl are stumbling. The 3 of them are the only people that didn't decide to be idiots and drink whatever pink concoction was shoved their way. Katsuki was pretty sure half and half downed a shot or 3 without knowing what they were, and now Deku was having to keep him on his feet. Lightweight a-hole. Katsuki stopped when they reached the sidewalk, about to go their separate ways. See you later, Deku. Yes, of course. Deku beamed at him, then tilted his head. Wait, I thought you said I could never leave you again. Katsuki tensed as a blush slammed into his face. He had said that while feeling a lot of things. Kind of meant it. Shut up, Deku, or I will make good on that, he snapped, getting defensive and flustered. Good to know, Kaken, Deku said with a soft smile. Before Katsuki registers what's going on, Deku closes the distance between them, kisses his cheek again, and then is back with Todoroki slumped on his shoulder as he walks away. Bye, Kaken. He calls back as Katsuki just stands there, dumbfounded and slack-jawed. He can feel his heart beating wildly in his chest, and his palms start to sweat as his cheeks burned. What the F-? The next day is full of thinking about Deku, texting Deku, calling Deku, and nearly punching a hole in his wall because he can't get Deku out of his head. When he wakes up Sunday morning and finds that his first instinct is to check his phone to see if Deku messaged, he can't stand it anymore. He doesn't have a therapy session scheduled until tomorrow, but he needs to figure this out before he goes crazy. And there is only one person besides Deku himself that Katsuki trusts enough to talk about this. When he slams open the dorm room door unannounced, Kirishima barely flinches. Instead, he just glances up from his seat on a floor beanbag where he's eating a bowl of cereal and watching TV and smiles. Repeat, he's eating cereal on the floor. What the F dash, shitty hair? Katsuki asked, staring him down. Sit at effing table or some sheet. Hello to you too, Bakugou bro, Kirishima said cheerily, setting his bowl down on the carpet. The FING carpet. Katsuki can't believe he's going to ask for advice from this. How can I help you this lovely morning? Put a shitty sock in it, Katsuki snaps, kicking the door closed behind him. He's too stressed to be nice, but he knows he's about to ask for help, so he takes a deep breath. I take that back. Sorry. It's a bit easier to apologize to Kirishima because he's done it before. Kirishima give him a look, and Katsuki knows that he knows something is wrong. He turns off the TV and gestures to the beanbag across from him. Katsuki scowls at it, wondering how many bowls of mac and cheese or soup had been spilled on it, but sits anyways. Kirishima, having dealt with Katsuki for so long, doesn't ask him what's wrong or say anything at all, just sits there and waits for him to get his head together. Hey Katsuki, this is fine. It's Kirishima. You can trust him with this, he thought to himself. He took a deep breath and looked up to meet Kirishima's watchful eyes, opened his mouth, then chickened at the last second and slumped his head in his hands. Stop being a coward. Have you ever, had a French crush or whatever? He finally asked. Gah, he sounds like a 12-year-old. Not his fault he's never thought about this before. He was focused on school. And Deku wasn't there anymore, his shitty brain supplies. He hears Kirishima shift in his seat and looked up to find him quickly wiping surprise off his face with a smile. Yep, he answers. A couple, actually. Why do you ask? Katsuki's mind went blank. He didn't really come in here with a plan. How do you know? He eventually thinks to say, know that you have a crush? Kirishima clarified. Katsuki nods. HM. There could be a couple kinds of crushes. Or levels. Like, at first, you just kind of see this person and you maybe think, hey, they're attractive, or cute or something. Or maybe you start feeling nervous around them. And you know you want to hang out with them. And if the crush goes deeper than that, you might start thinking about them a lot. And you notice more than their looks, such as their sense of humor or manliness or dash. Or their stupid FING heroic selflessness and bravery that makes you want to kill them for getting in dangerous situations. Katsuki's brain adds to the list. And that's what I would call a crush, Kirishima finished, and Katsuki realized he missed a chunk of what Shitty Hair had said. It didn't really matter. But, Katsuki started, then trails off. In a sudden burst of anger, he grabs a nearby pillow and whips it at the wall. It lands with a soft thunk and slides to the ground. F dash. The rage squeezes tight in his chest and he grabs another pillow, this time shoving his face into it and trying not to scream. He couldn't keep doing this. He had to stay in control of his stupid emotions. He lets out a low groan yell into the pillow, then takes a few deep breaths, counting to 10 and then back down. He looked back up and Kirishima, who was just watching him, knowing that pushing wouldn't help. Sorry about the pillow. I just I don't. He shoved his face back into the pillow and groans again. He hated not being able to form his thoughts correctly. This doesn't make sense. It just seems SOSOFANG juvenile, he finally said. Crushes made him think of shitty hormonal teenagers and giddy first kiss sheet. The stuff he felt about Deku was something like that, but it was more than that. Maybe? What do you mean? When you F-dash. Okay, pretend you have this person that you know. A friend or some sheet, Katsuki said, not quite sure where he was going with this. Kirishima nodded. And then whenever you see them it's like F-dash. Like sun came back or some sheet. He can't even meet Kirishima's eyes. He sounds so FNG cheesy and dumb, but it's true. And you feel all happy and sheet around them and you don't care what anyone thinks except maybe them? And you kind of sort of think they're a bit pretty or something, and all that like nervous stuff happens too. Katsuki feels himself blush. And when they hypothetically tell you that somebody hurt them, he trails off, thinking about the scars and the look on Deku's face when he told Katsuki about seeing the bullies beating somebody up. You get more angry than you have ever been because they keep throwing themselves in danger for other people or the goddamn bird, but they're never FING thinking about themselves because they're too selfless and brave, and that pisses you off because if something happened to them, what the hell are you supposed to do if they're not okay? The words come spilling out too fast for him to even think them beforehand. He's on the verge of hyperventilating, so he rakes his hands through his hair roughly to ground himself before everything becomes an angry blur. Bakugou! He heard Kirishima shift towards him, but he puts a hand out to stop him. I'm fine, just give me a second. He rubbed his hands over his face, huffing, then sighed and flopped backwards on the beanbag to stare at the ceiling. Would you call that sheet a crush? He finished. Kirishima was quiet long enough for the panic and anger to start creeping back, but he finally says something. Dude, that's a bit more than a crush. It's what Katsuki had been expecting, but he still doesn't have any other explanation. Then what the F is it? It kind of sounds like you are in love with this person. What? Katsuki shrieks, shooting upright. No, that's not even dash. The denial dies on his tongue. He can't explain it. He doesn't get any of it. But as soon as her hears it, it just makes sense. Like the last puzzle piece finally clicking into place in his brain. I'm in love with Deku. Sheet. Bro, don't be like that. Love is a good thing, Kirishima said, an attempt at calming him down. But it's unnecessary. Katsuki feels like he should be raging right now. Freaking out. Something. That's what he does. But for some reason he just feels acceptance. And maybe a little sadness. It was highly unlikely that Deku would like him back, let alone love him. Not after he'd been such an a-hole in their middle school days. He didn't bully Deku as bad as some other people did, but he was still a huge JRK. He'd push him around and throw insults at him. He always told Deku to stop being such a crybaby and isekai it up. He was angry at everything back then, and Deku set him off most of all because he just never seemed to go away. He always was trying to help, and it made Katsuki feel like Deku thought he was an inferior. And then Deku had left before he could figure his sheet out and apologize. Deku was here now. Is it ever too late to apologize for something? Kirishima blinked at him and tilted his head, surprised by the seemingly sudden change in topic. He thought on the question for a moment. I don't think it's ever too late to say sorry, but it could be too late to have the apology accepted. But you should say it anyways because you really mean it, right? Kirishima gave him a funny smile, maybe soft. Yeah. Determination overcame the sadness. He needed to apologize to Deku. Not to make him fall in love or any shit like that. Katsuki would have to deal with those feelings later. But because he should. It would take a therapy session or two to build up to, but that never stopped him before. At least, not since first year of high school. And as a bonus, if the nerd did end up accepting the apology, Katsuki could feel free to flirt his brains out. He couldn't stop a grin. Okay. He flopped back on the beanbag. Thanks. Of course, dude. You know, that was manly as hell for you to do. Katsuki huffed a tiny laugh at that. Can I, ask you some stuff though? Katsuki sat up and sighed. After what he'd just done, Kirishima deserved to know whatever he wanted to know. Sure. Why'd you come to me about this? That wasn't what he'd been expecting. Because I trust you. And it's my therapist's day off and I really needed to figure it out. Kirishima smiled at him. Oh, I'm glad you trust me, bro. Now, would you be okay with me asking the other type of questions? Katsuki could tell by his expression exactly the kind of questions he wanted to ask. He wanted to say no, but he'd have to deal with this eventually. No time like the FING present. I reserve my right to silence, he answered. Kirishima grinned. Who is it? Now that he had expected. Take a guess. Kirishima responded immediately. Midoriya. Katsuki resisted the urge to bury his face in a pillow and just answered with silence. Oh my god bro, that is so. It's like a movie. Childhood friends reunited only to fall in love. Katsuki growled at him as a warning and Kirishima settled down a bit. How'd you figure it out? You literally just saw me figure it out. No. I mean, what made you come in here? The catalyst event, per se. Katsuki felt his cheeks warm. The FING party. The party? Kirishima asked, pushing for an explanation. We, had a really serious talk in the bathroom and then Katsuki was full-on blushing now. He pinned you the ground? Katsuki whipped a pillow at Kirishima and hit him square in the face, but Shitty Hair just cackled. Am I wrong? Again, Katsuki didn't say anything, just blushed furiously as he glared. It was all the confirmation Kirishima needed. Wow, Bakugou likes being pinned. Imagine what Mina would say. Or Kami. Katsuki could imagine many things Cotton Candy Brains and Dunce Face would say about that, so he scowled at Kirishima. If you tell them I will hunt you down. Wouldn't think of it, bro, not my place. What was your talk in the bathroom? Katsuki jolted at the question and Kirishima quickly backtracked. Wait, no, you don't have to answer that. Personal. Got it. Katsuki nodded and Kirishima tapped his chin, thinking of more questions. How long have you loved him or whatever? Katsuki thought about that for a second. His first answer was not long, but he immediately knew that was wrong. He thought back to his very first memories of Deku. He and Deku squished next to each other on the floor, reading the same comic book as Katsuki made silly voices for every character because Deku always looked so impressed. He and Deku excitedly drawing themselves as heroes, always as a pair. He and Deku wrestling in the grass in the middle of summer, then going to get ice cream, grinning all the way even as they were chided by their parents for getting so messy. Katsuki practicing climbing up every tree in the neighborhood just to take Deku there the next day and show off his perfect first try. Katsuki being instantly attracted towards anything colored green, despite telling people orange was his favorite. Katsuki forcing himself to stay awake just so he could talk with Deku late into the night on a sleepover, hiding under the covers with a flashlight. Katsuki being totally ready to jump in front of a car to get Deku out of the way. His body moving on its own to save him. Bakugou? Sorry, was that too much? Katsuki looked up at Kirishima, unsure of what to feel. No, it's just complicated. He might have loved Deku even back then. But who does the things he did and says the things he said to the people they loved? How can you claim to love someone while having caused them pain? I want to say since I knew him, but I don't know if I have the right to say that. The right? Katsuki sighed, guilt overfilling at the image of Deku crying. Crying because of him. You don't do the things I did to somebody you love. What do you mean? Katsuki swallowed thickly and rested his chin on his knees. I fed up. Badly. I mean, you remember how I was in high school. Kirishima nodded. I was angry. I still am, but at least now I kind of deal with it. Back in middle school, before Deku left, I don't know. A horrible person. I mean, I say I love him, but I called him useless every day of our lives. Do you think he's useless? No. Katsuki jolted up, insulted for some reason. He's not useless, he's the kindest, nicest, brightest person ever and I wasn't that. I was an angry a-hole and I pushed him around every day of middle school and yet he was always there. Every day after school he was just there, waiting for me. And when I ignored him, he just followed me home along with the FING dog and when I fell in the stupid river he tried to help me out, but I told him he was useless and couldn't help anybody. I thought he was looking down on me, or like he thought I needed him and Katsuki can feel tears brimming in his eyes. And I did need him and I hated that. He'd talked about this stuff with his therapist before, but he'd never brought up Deku specifically. And it hurt to admit. He almost got hit by a car and I saw my life flash before my eyes like I was the one who was about to die. Like if he died, I would too, and that scared the shit out of me. He scares the shit out of me. He'd thought he'd got the feelings over with. He'd thought he'd accepted this. Apparently not yet. Suddenly, there was an arm around his back and Kirishima was squeezing him into a side hug. He was so overwhelmed that he let him, even melting into it a bit. Katsuki swore quietly. This is too much to dump on you. I should have waited. Dude, no, it's okay. I'm your friend, I'm always going to be here for you. Kirishima laid his head on Katsuki's shoulder. I'm really glad you trust me with this. You're probably one of 2 people I ever would, Katsuki admitted. Not even his therapist had made that list, because he'd only known her for the past 6 months of college. The school therapist he'd had for 4 years, maybe, but even she was shaky. Kirishima, though, felt like a brother in more than blood. He's the reason Katsuki was even able to sit here and say all these things out loud. Would the other be Midoriya? Katsuki sniffled. Obviously. I'm honored to be so far up in the list of people you don't hate, Kirishima joked, bringing back his usual casual air. Katsuki was grateful for it. Second only to the soulmate, I feel like I should get a reward. Katsuki glared at him. Shut the F up, I am the reward, he said, not disputing the soulmate claim. He could think about that after he apologized. Kirishima laughed and let go of him, returning to his own beanbag and grabbing his bowl of cereal off the floor. I can't believe I trust you with this sheet when you eat bowls of cereal sitting on a carpeted floor, shitty hair. No one should trust you with anything ever. I'm an adult, I do what I want, Kirishima said, grinning. Katsuki rolled his eyes and his phone buzzed in his back pocket. He pulled it out to look. Cat can help. With what? I have to finish this math assignment before I start a class and I am lost. Didn't you get in with a full-ride academic scholarship? You're supposed to be smart. Okay, but 2 things. And 3, maybe I just want to hang out with you. Ever thought about that? Katsuki's heart does a happy dance in his chest and he can't help but smile. You texting the love of your life? Katsuki glared at him. Shut up. Yes. Kirishima grinned but Katsuki returned to his phone, blushing. That's 3 things, Dek. Would you look at that? Bad at counting. Counting is math. And I am bad at it. Please help Kaken, I know you're a genius. As if Katsuki would ever say no. Okay fine, I will help you with your FANG math. Today? If you could, today would be great. It's due tomorrow and I'm free all day. So, I can come to your dorm at lunch. Wait, sheet. Was that too forward? No, he and Deku used to share beds. For FS sake, they can be in each other's rooms. Sounds great. Yay, thank you Kaken. Laughing face. My dorm is 3. See you nerd. Yes, see you in a few hours. He used so many exclamation points. 2 FNG cute. Katsuki pocketed his phone again, still smiling, but he wiped the look away when he saw Kirishima watching him, looking utterly amused. Shut the F up, he snapped. I didn't say anything. You were thinking things. Kirishima laughed. So, what did Midoriya want? I'm going to go help him do math or some sheet. Kirishima wiggled his eyebrows and smiled. Ooh, study date. Not FING date, shitty hair, Katsuki corrected. Come on, not even gonna try? No flirting? Not until I apologize, Katsuki said, face serious. Kirishima looked shocked, then grinned. Dude, that's so manly. Are you going to apologize today? I think I need to talk to my therapist before I do that. He really didn't want to F this up. That sounds good. I'm proud of you, man. Yeah, whatever. Katsuki stretched out his arms and got to his feet. I'm gonna go on a run or something. Have fun with your shitty floor cereal. Kirishima laughed and Katsuki paused, turning around halfway out the door. Thank you. You're a good guy. He really didn't say that enough. Kirishima beamed at him. No problem, bro. Have a great day. Call me or barge into my room anytime. Izuka might be doing too much. He didn't really need that much help with math. What was he thinking? The answer was that he wasn't thinking. Not when it came to Kaken. He was practically never thinking when it came to Kaken. Or he was thinking way too much and it was all about him. Like whether or not he still liked fireworks as much as he used to, or those little things you throw on the ground to make really loud pop noises. One time he and Kaken were playing around with those out on the street and Izuku threw one down just as a dog walked by and it scared the dog. He got so sad about Scaring the dog, he started crying and Kakin got into an argument with the lady who owned the dog about it. But Izuku kept. Knock knock. Izuku jumped at the sound, nearly falling backwards off his chair. Deku, I can hear you mumbling in there, Kakin called through the door. Izuku shook his head to bring himself out his mind. Realizing he had been so nervous, he started rambling alone in his room like a crazy person. Sorry, just a second, he called back. He glanced at himself in the mirror as he passed, adjusting his headband slightly to tuck back in the flyaway hairs. It was a futile attempt. All the hair pushed back behind the headband looked like an exploded cactus. But whatever, not anything Kakin hadn't seen before or would even care about. Izuku wasn't even sure why he himself cared. He shook his head again and went to open the door. Hey, Kakin, he smiled. Kakin blinked at him, then his eyes seemed to flick around from his face to his arms then back to his face. Maybe he was still thinking about the scars? Izuku really hoped that whole thing didn't make it weird. As a test, he stuck out his hand for a handshake. Kakin looked down at his hands, squinted, then rolled his eyes and shifted the takeout boxes he was holding to under one arm. Izuku grinned as they did the handshake, pumping his fist in the air excitedly. Plus ultra. Plus ultra, Kakin said, sounding bored yet amused. Izuku started, realizing he was still blocking the doorway, and moved to the side. Come on in. Did you bring food? Yeah, Kakin answered, entering the room and letting Izuku close the door behind him. I figured you still did the whole dumb, I can't eat until I finish all the work I have to do thing. I don't do that. Izuku protested. Kakin gave him a look. Okay, have you eaten today? I had a. Izuku trailed off, poking his fingers together. No. That's what I FNG thought. Kakin shook his head and almost smiled. How the F did you survive without me for 5 years? My mom, Izuku said with a smile and shrug. He grabbed a chair from the spare desk he'd gotten lucky, no roommate, and set it by his desk. How is Auntie, by the way? Kakin asked, setting down the boxes of food on the desk. Izuku plopped into his seat, twisting it to face Kakin, and gestured for him to take the other chair. She's good. I think she's got a bit of an empty nest thing going on, but hopefully she gets used to it. He was touched Kakin was asking about his mother. Kakin sat down across from him. Did you live with her before? Right up until I transferred here. It was cheaper than the dorms at my old school. Why'd you come here? Kakin asked, popping open one of the takeout boxes to reveal. Izuku could hardly believe it. Katsudon. Did Kakin remember that it was his favorite? Did he do this on purpose? Probably just a coincidence. Yeah, why would it be anything else? Izuku said, trying to remember the question. Like I said, I got the scholarship and they let my credits transfer. UA has always been my dream school, so. Lucky you. Izuku looked up from the food to find Kakin watching him with a foreign yet soft expression. Izuku cleared his throat quietly and tried to will his blush away. Yeah, especially because the scholarship means I don't have to use any of my dumb SPRM donors' money, he said, forcing himself to focus on the conversation. Kakin's eyes widened and he made a choking noise, then laughed loudly. You're what? Izuku couldn't help a giggle. SPRM donor. It's what one of Todoroki's brothers call their shitty dad, and I thought it was fitting for mine. It had been shocking when Tia, Todoroki's mysterious eldest brother with lots of piercings who worked at a tattoo shop with very strange people, had said it, but as soon as Izuku got over that, he thought it was hilarious and the best thing he'd ever heard. Kakin laughed again. Izuku would never tire of that sound. DMN. I like it. The two of them slipped into easy conversation over the food after that, and Izuku almost forgot what he'd invited Kakin there for in the first place. He was right, Kakin was still a genius, and easily helped him figure out all the problems he'd been stuck on. It was a little hard to focus, though, because every so often he'd glance over to find Kakin watching him, a strange look on his face. Sometimes he looked confused, sometimes he looked sad, most of the time he was almost smiling. What in the world was he thinking about? Time flew by quickly, and suddenly it was early evening. They'd finished studying hours ago and moved on to playing some video games. Kakin was way too good at them, as with everything, and then just to talking. About everything, the latest comics they'd read, the funny things their friends said the other day, the worst and best teachers they'd had, and 1,000 others. It felt so natural to do, and it was a feeling Izuku had been aching for the past 5 years. Maybe longer than that because of their falling out kind of back in middle school. Really, if you forced him to sum up his history with Kaken in one word, he wouldn't be able to. He could say complicated, but it was probably only complicated to outsiders. To him, it went like this: friends since they were babies because of their parents' relationship, best friends though elementary, and then still friends in middle school, but only on their own. At school, Kaken almost totally ignored him. Maybe a few mean words here and there, but never enough to push Izuku away. Izuku didn't think Kaken could push him away even if they both really tried. And then, of course, second year of middle school, his mom dropped the bomb that his shitty dad's child support had gone down significantly, and she was forced to get a job that moved them halfway across Japan. Izuku had told Kaken, not totally knowing the reaction to expect, and was met with anger. He probably should have expected that. Kaken ignored him in and out of school for a full week. Arguably one of the worst weeks of his life. Then, in a sudden turn that nearly gave Izuku whiplash, Kaken went from being said and ignoring him to literally not letting Izuku leave his side for an entire weekend before his move. He invited him over on a Friday night, and every time Izuku mentioned that maybe he should be heading home, Kaken ignored that and came up with a new thing to drag him into doing. He stayed at the Bakugou's house the whole weekend, confused but kind of happy. And finally, Izuku left and never heard a peep from Kaken again except through the mom grapevine. Deku, Kaken said, laying back on Izuku's bed and tossing a stress ball up and down, "You can't expect me to believe you think All Might is going to lose against effing All for One." They'd moved back to talking about comic books, and Izuku had been unable to stop himself from sharing his theories. He had so many and Kaken knew it. "Think about it," Izuku protested, cross-legged on his desk chair next to the bed. "All Might always wins stuff and saves all the people, but what if he didn't? Then he wouldn't even be All Might?" Kaken said, like Izuku was an idiot, which was a common tone. "Exactly," Izuku said, snapping his fingers and leaning closer to the bed excitedly, "which opens up so many interesting possibilities if he did lose. Would he be All Might anymore? The symbol of peace, unable to keep the peace? Think of the storytelling possibilities." "Okay, but you're still missing one thing." Kaken snatched the stress ball out of the air and sat up, glaring. "All Might doesn't lose. But All for One is super powerful, and the hero always has to fail before they win. It adds the drama and makes it so much more impactful." Izuku pressed on. When Kaken didn't answer, Izuku suddenly noticed that, in his excitement, he had leaned far towards the bed, and now that Kaken was sitting up, their faces were maybe 6 inches apart. Very close. Close enough for him to notice small details about Kaken, like how long his eyelashes were or the pink flush on his cheeks, or once again how striking his sharp crimson eyes were. Or just the all-around fact that Kaken was very, very attractive. But just as he was about to scramble away, a foot landed on his chest and he was shoved backwards in his chair, rolling halfway across the room. He barely reacted, too focused on the fact that Kaken was still staring at him, foot halfway up after pushing him. And he was staring back. His first thought after what is happening happened to be staring contest, so he latched onto that train of thought before he dissolved into a panic over Kaken's face, narrowing his eyes a bit and quirking an eyebrow up. Kaken's eyes widened ever so slightly, but he didn't blink or look away, so Izuku didn't either. He had the fleeting wonder what someone would think if they walked in on this moment. Izuku had no idea what he would think if he did. He had no idea what he was currently thinking. As he mentioned, he rarely thinks properly when it comes to Kaken. Which is probably why, also without thinking, he instinctually started shuffling his feet on the floor to roll his chair closer to Kaken, stopping in front of desk. The staring contest was still going, but Izuku felt like he didn't even remember how to blink anymore. "Dude!" suddenly yelled a very loud voice from outside, followed by a crash and obnoxiously loud laughter that made Izuku jump a little in his seat and look back to his door. He blinked for a second, eyes burning, then frowned and turned back to Kaken. "Darn it, that's not fair," he bemoaned. The loud people outside and his words seemed to cut through whatever tension had been building, and Kaken smirked. Ha, loser. Izuku pouted at him and huffed. That doesn't count. Oh, it totally does. You lost. Fine, Izuku conceded. What's the damage? For the two of them, losing a contest meant you have to do whatever the winner said, usually give them something. Izuku had lost quite a few action figures in his youth thanks to that rule. Kaken leaned back on his bed. For some reason Kaken is in my bed comes to the front of his mind, which is weird, because that's happened a billion times, propping himself up on his hands and tilting his head to the side. What time is it? Kaken asked. Izuku checked the clock on his desk, then gasped a little. Oh, it's 5:30 already. Time flies with Kaken, per usual. All right, Kaken said, pushing himself off the bed and to his feet. You're buying me dinner. I'm starved. Izuku's heart jumped and fluttered at the idea of having dinner with Kaken, but he tamped the feeling down quickly because nope. People have dinner with their friends. It's a thing. A friend thing. What? He aimed anyways. That's so expensive. Kaken rolled his eyes. Not some fancy sheet, just takeout. There's a place down the street. Besides, you're the one who lost. Izuku stood, groaning. It was the people's fault. Didn't make me blink, Kaken said, smirk widening as he bent to put on his boots. That's 'cause you're a stone man. Izuku protested, whacking his friend on the shoulder before slipping on his own shoes. Kaken laughed in his throat, a slightly rough, baritone sound that was very much unlike his giggling but made Izuku's heart react all the same. You should know better than to start staring contests with me then, dumb Deku. Izuku put his hand on the door handle, cracking it open slightly, before turning to look at Kaken next to him. At least I'm taller than the stone man. Kaken screeched, but Izuku was already out the door and sprinting down the hall, laughing. He skidded to a stop in front of the door to the stairs, then flung it open and raced down them, hearing Kaken following him. Despite the slight fear, being chased down by Kaken was one of the most fun things he ever did. It was weird, seeing as he always did the metaphorical chasing in their friendship, but in terms of physically chasing each other down, he was always the one running. He could never chase Kaken down because Kaken was too prideful and brave to run away from him, and Izuku was never nearly as threatening. He burst through the door on the first floor, startling a couple people in the hallway as he rushed past them and yelled an apology. He turned a corner, then came to a screeching halt on the carpet, trying to stop himself before he slammed into a wall. He still had no idea how the dorms were laid out, and this was obviously not an exit. But Izuku whirled around and raced back into the main hallway, and then suddenly someone slammed into him and swept him off his feet, making him yell in surprise. Kaken, he yelped, realizing that Kaken was the one who ran into him and had now slung him over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. What are you doing? He yelped again, but he couldn't keep the rising giggles out of his voice. I'm stronger than you, was how Kaken answered, and Izuku was fully giggling now. Was Kaken really that butthurt about the height difference? Okay, put me down. Izuku laughed, not really meaning it. Nope, deal with it, Kaken answered. Izuku couldn't see his face, but he could hear the smug smirk anyways. He felt himself blush, unsure if it was the closeness or that fact that his head was hanging upside down. The blood rush made him giggle even harder. He heard a door open and warm evening air hit him, filling his lungs nicely along with the smell of Kaken. Are you carrying me to dinner? He teased. In response, Kaken stopped walking and dumped Izuku off his shoulder. Izuku barely caught himself on his feet, stumbling before Kaken grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him upright, glaring. I'm not your FNG chauffeur, Kaken grumbled, letting go of Izuku's shirt. You're the one who picked me up, Izuku said, laughing some more and readjusting his shirt. He looked up, expecting to be scowled at, but instead found Kaken staring at him with a surprisingly neutral expression. For Kaken, whose resting face was halfway to a scowl, neutral was practically soft, and Izuku felt his cheeks start to warm. Where are we going? He managed. Kaken stared at him for a moment longer, just long enough for Izuku to start being both flustered and concerned that Kaken hit his head, then blinked a few times, turned on his heel, stalking off towards the parking lot. There's a ramen place near here, Kaken said as Izuku jogged to catch up, still very confused. Ramen sounds good, he said, trying to sound normal. Do you go there often? Shitty Hair's mom runs the place, so I've been there a few times, Kaken answered. Shitty Hair, Izuku repeated, thinking over all of Kaken's friends in his mind. Kirishima? Kaken gave him a side look and a smirk. Yeah. But his hair is so cool. Izuku protested, throwing his hands up. Of course you think that, Kaken scoffed. You're so mean, Kaken. Tell me something I don't know, Kaken said, smirk growing wider. Besides, they're the idiots who wanted to be my friends. I told them to F off. And yet you still call them your friends? Izuku said, bumping their shoulders together as they walked. You're a big ol' softy now, Kaken. Kaken bumped their shoulders together again, but this time it was more his attempt to body slam Izuku to the ground. Take that back right now. Izuku stumbled to the side, then righted himself, giggling. No way. You care about people now. Kaken kicked his shoe, a lot lighter than Izuku would have expected. More a scuff than a kick. When he spoke, his voice was somehow both a grumble and the gentlest Izuku had ever heard it. You say that like I haven't been caring about you our whole fucking lives. Izuku nearly tripped on air, and in his haste to catch himself, he stepped on his own shoelace and did trip on it, then went careening towards the pavement. Because he's so cool and collected like that. But before he could even think about trying to lessen the impact of his fall, a hand wrapped around one of his flailing wrists and he was flipped over, shoe twisting on the pavement. Another hand was on his back, and all of a sudden Izuku found himself in a position he's pretty sure he had a dream about in 6th grade. Because Kaken just French dipped him to the ground. And he is now stiff as board, 45-degree angle to the sidewalk, Kaken's knee pressed into the small of his back, hand still around his wrist that's sticking straight up in the air, other arm curled around him to reach his back that had Kaken's face and body so close to his own he was about to combust. He froze, and Kaken seemed to do the same, the only sound coming from loud people way back in the dorms and a few cars on a nearby street. The spring air was fairly warm around them, but he could still starkly feel the contrast of Kaken's warmer breath on his face. I am going to die, he thought, this is literally going to kill me, but at least middle school Izuku can die happy. Guess you do care, he said after a moment of tense silence, and it came out way too hoarse for his liking. Very smooth, Izuku. You sound like a choking preteen. Izuku half expected Kaken to drop him, half expected him to just push him to his feet again and tell him to tie his shoes better, and 100% did not expect him to look almost sad. And yet Kaken looked like that, his eyes full of something heavy, something akin to regret. But what? Izuku frowned up at him. Are you okay? Kaken opened his mouth, then took a deep breath and shook his head, closing it again. This is why you're supposed to tie your fucking shoes, Deku. Ah, there you are, Kaken. Izuku rolled his eyes. Okay, I'll tie my shoes. Can I stand now, though? Kaken huffed at him, then Izuku possibly. Momentarily ascended this plane of existence because Kaken moved his hands to his waist to bring them both back up to standing. Okay, maybe Ochako was making some points about the crush. Oh god. He could feel his cheeks burning even after Kaken let him go and stepped back. Desperately hoping that Kaken didn't notice his blush, he knelt down to tie his shoes, willing it to go away. He mustered up a normal smile, standing up and sticking a foot out. That better? He asked, gesturing to his shoe. Once again surprising him, Kaken just said, yeah, and turned to keep walking instead of making some teasing comment or even an eye roll. Weird. Izuku fell into step beside Kaken again, glancing over to find him staring at the sidewalk beneath them. His first instinct was to ask if Kaken was okay again, but he knew that would probably be met with a snappy, defensive, I'm fine. He knew Kaken. Izuku would just have to piece together some of the story himself, then try to help. Right now, though, he had to cheer Kaken up again. Hey, he said, you said the ramen place is just a block down this street, right? Yeah, Kaken said, squinting at him. He definitely knew what Izuku was about to say, and Izuku grinned at him. Race you. He got a barely one-step head start before Kaken was taking off down the sidewalk, making him sprint to catch up. Izuku had always been a fast runner, and he had longer legs, but Kaken was fast enough to keep his head start and grab the door handle to the ramen shop first. Izuku had so much momentum built up that he skidded to a stop and bumped into his friend, bouncing back and almost toppling before righting himself. "Christ," Kaken said with a laugh that made Izuku celebrate internally, "you have no balance to speak of." Izuku laughed too. "I've never been a coordinated person, you know that. Like a drunk baby deer. Who lost? Again." Kaken smirked at him, and Izuku couldn't help the feeling that he had definitely won. "I barely lost, come on," he protested. "Give me a break here." "Fine, you owe me a soda or some sheet," Kaken said with a wave of his hand before opening the door to the shop. There was a light tinkling of bells, and Izuku stepped into a shop that immediately soothed everything inside him and smelled like warmth. It was very homey and comfortable. "Good evening," Kaken called into the empty shop. Or at least, Izuku thought it was empty until a tall woman with long, curly black hair ducked into the behind-counter area from a back room. Izuku might have guessed this was Kirishima's mother, even if Kaken hadn't told him beforehand, and despite the hair color difference. The two of them had the same presence, that presence being comforting and large. Mrs. Kirishima was just as tall and nearly as buff as her son, and their grins were identical. "Bakugou, I thought I heard you," Mrs. Kirishima said, a little loud for the small space. "Who's this?" Even with all his attempts at improving his self-confidence and social skills, Izuku was still startled at being addressed and momentarily forgot his own name. "I'm Midoriya Izuku," he finally blurted, remembering to bow. "Nice to meet you." "Kirishima Ishii, pleasure to meet you too. What's a polite kid like you doin' with Bakugou?" Izuku stifled a giggle and Kaken elbowed him in the shoulder, making Mrs. Kirishima laugh loudly. "All right, what can I get you too?" Izuku and Kaken ordered their food and sat at the counter as Mrs. Kirishima bustled around the kitchen to prepare their orders, making pleasant conversation about where he was from or their school life. Mrs. Kirishima seemed a very kind, boisterous woman, and a very good chef. Izuku had to stop himself from inhaling his food in one go. "Thank you so much for the meal, Mrs. Kirishima," he said. "That was really good." "You're welcome, kid," Mrs. Kirishima said, swiping a hand through his hair to ruffle it like his mother sometimes did. "Come back anytime, you're sweet." Izuku smiled nervously and nodded, as he did with most compliments, then reached into his back pocket for his wallet. "Oh," he said, pulling out the money to pay. "Do you happen to have soda here?" "Sure do," Mrs. Kirishima answered. "Coke?" "Yes, please," Izuku said, adding the extra money to his payment. Mrs. Kirishima handed him a can of Coca-Cola, which he promptly handed to Kaken. "My debt is cleared." Kaken smirked, cracking the can open. "For now." "You wish," Izuku said, poking his friend's shoulder. "You're paying for dinner next time." "As if," Kaken challenged, jabbing him in the shoulder back. If they weren't inside, Izuku would have tackled him, but instead he just glared and stuck his tongue out. Being with Kaken made him act childish and he knew it, but he couldn't help it. That was their bond. "See you later, Mrs. Kirishima," Kaken said, waving at their host and heading for the door. "Yes, thank you," Izuku said before rushing out behind Kaken. By that time, the sun was low in the sky, the beginnings of a sunset. Izuku was hit with a sudden wave of nostalgia at the sight, remembering young summers spent glued to Kaken's side, the two of them doing anything and everything until the sun went down and their parents called them home. It seemed so long ago, and he'd been sure he'd never get it again. But here he was. Whatever rope that tied him to Kaken, and he was sure there was one, hadn't been cut. It was merely frayed a bit at the middle. The world could be amazing like that. Thinking all this made his heart warm from the inside as the setting sun warmed him from the outside. "What are you so smiley about?" Kaken asked, bringing Izuku out of his head. They were walking so close Izuku could have linked their pinkies together, but he didn't. "Just thinkin'," he answered. "About?" Kaken pressed. Izuku smiled wider and bumped their shoulders together. "About how lucky I am that the universe brought us together. Again. I'm very blessed." "Lame," Kaken said, but his soft expression didn't match his words. Worried that he was about to do or say something stupid, Izuku tore his gaze from Kaken's crimson eyes and looked back at the road ahead of them, but couldn't stop his smile or faint blush. After a bit of silence, he glanced over to find Kaken still watching him with the same face, and his blush deepened. Somehow, they'd gravitated towards each other so much Izuku was surprised he hadn't tripped over Kaken's feet yet, or that Kaken hadn't pushed him away. He was becoming increasingly flustered and confused by this day. It was so unfair how much power Kaken had over him just by looking at him. "Thanks for helping me study," he blurted, because he talks when he's nervous and Kaken was making him very nervous, though in the best way. Kaken kept staring for a second, not responding, then blinked at him, made a slight coughing noise. "What? I mean, sure. Yeah. Whatever." Did he actually give Kaken a concussion at the party? Before he could ask, he realized that they had reached the front door to his dorm building and were stopped in front of it. "Guess I'll see you later, Kaken," he said, trying to sound put together. He held out his hand for the handshake, and Kaken complied, not even rolling his eyes that hard. "See you later, snerd." Izuku ran a quick risk calculation in his head, and, before he could chicken out, leaned down to kiss Kaken's cheek again. He was inside with the door shut before he even saw how Kaken reacted, heart fluttering. He didn't know what overcame him to kiss Kaken that first day, or why he kept doing it, but he wasn't planning on stopping until Kaken told him to. He'd survived the last few times, at least. Today was a very good day. Katsuki was pretty sure he stood outside of Deku's dorm for a full 30 seconds before he remembered that he was supposed to be walking back to his room. His brain had got to be FNG broken. All trains of thought had been delayed at the station for far too long. Jesus FNG Christ, I hate this. Except he kind of didn't. His feelings were all a jumbled mess of happy and confused and angry and guilty and ugh. By the time he got back to his dorm room, he'd moved past the giddy cheek kiss Deku's pretty thoughts and had landed right back in all that stupid guilt. He had been that close to saying it. It had been the perfect moment to say it. But he didn't. The words got stuck in his throat like lumps of jagged coal, and he couldn't cough them up. 2 words. Maybe more, that's all he had to say. "I'm sorry for being such an a-hole and making you think I don't care." But he didn't say it, because apologies are for when you're wrong, and Katsuki hates being wrong. He knows he was wrong though. He just has to make sure Deku knows that he knows. And then there was the fact that Katsuki thought about kissing Deku today on about 12 different occasions. Which made him feel even guiltier, because why should he get to think about kissing Deku when he was such an a-hole, and then he was angry for feeling guilty and everything started spiraling out of control like he was in high school again. Instead of letting himself be a dumb high schooler again and probably punching a hole in a wall, Katsuki forced out a series of deep breaths and flopped face first onto his bed. He would get through this. Stupid feelings had nothing on him, and he would not be defeated by them. He'd get things sorted out. Somehow. He squeezed his eyes shut tighter, breathing in the laundry detergent smell of his pillow, and suddenly he was thinking about Deku's smile and how he'd made a fool of himself. How long had he been staring at him? Deku probably thought he was creepy or something now. Ugh, stupid Deku made him feel so unsure and he hated this. A buzz from his pocket brings him out of his head, and he rolls over to check his phone. There were multiple missed texts from Kirishima. "Shitty hair. Dude, I'm so confused. Why is my mom telling me you went on a date? With a cute green-haired kid, hey Mito? What happened? Bakugou, answer me. Bakugou. Don't leave me hanging, dude. Bakugou?" Katsuki goes shooting upright in his bed and actually yells, "What the F dash?" out loud to his empty room. "What the hell? I wasn't on a date with Deku. Why would your mom think that? Bakugou, you're alive. If it wasn't a date, then what was it? We ate some effing ramen, that's it. I told you I'm not doing that shit right now. I know, that's why I was confused." She said he paid for it? It was difficult to be mad at a woman like Kirishima Ishii, but Katsuki was getting dangerously close. He lost AF contest, oh my god. So you made him pay for dinner? It's a thing we do. Does. You lose a contest, you have to do something, and I wanted if into ramen. It's not that deep. My mom is so sure he's your boyfriend, dude. She thinks you're cute together, if that helps. Why would that F help? They're his boyfriend. Going on a date with Deku. Kissing Deku. He felt like a high schooler in those shitty rom-coms Mina loves so much. Was he freaking out right now? Holy shit, he's pathetic. Pathetic and in love and gross. Okay, sorry. I'll correct her. You better. Wait, you don't want people thinking he's your boyfriend? Thought that was the eventual goal. Katsuki nearly hurled his phone at the wall. Why the F would I want other people to think that if he's not my actual boyfriend, idiot? I see. Anyways, how was your day? Katsuki almost left it at that, but with all the thoughts and feeling jumbling around inside him right then he wasn't sure what he'd do if he stopped distracting himself. How do people deal with this sheet? What sheet? Having a crush on someone. He can almost hear Kirishima laughing in the time it takes for him to respond, and glares at his phone because of it. Oh come on, it's not that bad. It is. Crushes are nice. They make you happy. No. So dramatic, dude. You'll be fine. You got me. Laughing face. How does that help at all? I can be your wingman supreme. Oh yes. You know what? This friendship is over. Bye. If you left me, who would you talk to about this? Katsuki glares at his phone again, huffing. Whatever. Besides, no flirting or wingmaning sheet is happening. I know, not until you apologize, which I still think is super manly to do, smiley face. No, not until he forgives me, and if he does. If he does. Either way, Katsuki is intent on making things right, no matter if Deku forgives him or not. He wants to deserve Deku, whether that be his friendship or anything else. And he definitely doesn't deserve Deku if he can't muster up the strength to say what Deku deserves to hear. Katsuki knows he's shit at words and communication. It's a problem he's worked on in therapy for years now. He also knows words mean a lot to Deku, though he always had this annoying way of understanding everything Katsuki said with actions. Which means Katsuki has to say it. He has to. He will. You know, I said it this morning, but I'm really proud of you, man. You've grown a lot since when I first met you, and I may not know Midoriya that well yet, but I'm sure he knows it too. And I meant it when I said I'm always here for you, smiley face. Gross. Thanks. The next morning came without much fanfare, which was just fine with Katsuki. He went on his usual morning run and gym workout with Kirishima, texted Deku good luck on his first day of classes, and went about his own school day as normal. Until lunch, that is, at which point he realized meeting up with Deku's friend group on the field was now supposed to be an everyday thing. Which he had no big complaints with, but the look Kirishima gave him upon relaying the news was enough to make him suspicious. He walked to the picnic tables with Kirishima, who had a class in the neighboring room to his before lunch, and found the two friend groups spread over two tables next to each other. Deku was on the end of one, talking to round cheeks and four eyes about something nerdy as sheet, if his excited expression and energetic hand movements were any indication. It was the same thing he'd been doing since they were brats. It was cute and he hated that the sight of it made him feel warm inside. Hey! Kirishima called loudly. Deku stopped talking and whipped his head around, eventually meeting Katsuki's eyes and breaking into a grin. Kirishima! Kaken! He chirped. And then Deku stood from the table, narrowing his eyes and grinning wider, and Katsuki barely had enough time to drop his bag before a blur of green hit him and sent him toppling to the ground. But Katsuki was not having that, because he had already decided he could not handle being pinned by Deku again, and he had other shit to do today that required a working brain. He almost faltered when Deku started laughing, but pulled himself together enough fight Deku off and pin him with a knee to the chest, wrists by his head. He was so gross. Deku's laugh? That's what got to him now. Seriously? W. Huh, he barked, smirking as Deku pouted up at him. Loser. Third time in a row, Deku. I know, Deku groaned. You're already rebuilding your streak. Now get off, I'm hungry. Katsuki complied, dusting the dirt off his shirt. It was probably a good thing he wore so much black. Help me up, Deku said with feigned innocence, making grabby hands out to Katsuki. Katsuki glared at him. Not falling for that. One time in elementary school he tried to help Deku off the ground and Deku repaid him by yanking him into a mud puddle. He never fell for it again. I have no idea what you're talking about, Deku answered, smiling. F off, Katsuki scoffed, kicking Deku's foot. Stand by yourself, dummy. Or I'm taking your shoe right now. Deku made a face, crinkling up his nose and sticking his tongue out like a 5-year-old. then kicked off one of his shoes and flung it up at Katsuki, who batted it away. Gross. You wanted it. Deku said, finally standing up and grinning at him. He's so pretty when he smiles, and Katsuki knows he's in deep shit when he doesn't even feel grossed out by that thought. It's like the realization came to him, and now he can't stop wondering how he had been so confused before. He loves everything about Deku. But all the happy thoughts are weighed down by the guilt, like thorny vines digging into everything and trying to tear it apart. He won't let it tear it apart. Izuku! Round face called from her seat, making Deku turn, which let Katsuki snap out of his head. I'm taking your Pocky. No! Deku yelped, rushing back to the table to snatch his food, but not before Pink Cheeks had stuffed a few Pocky sticks in her mouth. Katsuki grabbed his bag off the grass and took the empty seat next to Kirishima, on the side of the table that was end-to-end with Deku's, so they were almost next to each other, separated by the space between tables. Probably better for Katsuki that he wasn't sitting right next to Deku. He went to get his food from his bag, then turned to find Kirishima staring at him with a small, open-mouthed smile. What? He snapped. Kirishima made a noise that sounded an awful lot like stifling laughter, bringing his fist up to his mouth. Dude, he said quietly, leaning in a bit, you just stared at him for like a full 10 seconds. Katsuki resisted both the urge to punch Kirishima in the face and slam his own head into the table. He just, what now? How did he not even notice? Shut the F up. He scowled as Kirishima stifled more laughter into his hand, jabbing his friend in the ribs with his elbow. He might as well have punched a brick wall with how little Kirishima reacted. Sorry, Kirishima whispered. I just thought you should know. What are you two whispering about, huh? Mina said, poking her head out from the other side of Kirishima. Nothing, Katsuki said, a little too loud and sudden. Kirishima was obviously still trying to hold in laughter, and Katsuki was seriously about to hit him. Nothing, Mina repeated dramatically. You sure? Yeah, now F off. Mina gave him a look, then slowly her eyes drifted to somewhere behind him and a grin spread over her face before she looked at him again. Yeah, nothing. Mina relaxed back into her seat, still grinning, and Katsuki glanced behind him to find Deku watching him. Before he could stop himself, he made eye contact with the emerald green and Deku was beaming at him again. Kaken, are you yelling at your friends again? Deku teased with a smile that was somehow both sly and kind. What the F dash? They deserve it, he managed, hoping he responded at a normal speed. This was the worst. Deku cracked a laugh. Sure, Kaken. Another second passed, then Deku looked away and Katsuki could think straight again. Oh, Kirishima. Deku said, making Kirishima turn. I met your mother yesterday, she was really nice. And a great chef. Yeah, she told me about that. Kirishima said, making Katsuki try to glare at him without being too obvious. He was ignored. She thought you were nice too. Wait, how'd you meet Kirishima's mom? Roundface asked. She owns a ramen place down the street, Deku answered. Kaken and I went there last night. 'Cause you lost, Katsuki quickly added before any of their friends got the same idea Mrs. Kirishima had. People thinking Deku was his boyfriend made him feel gross and wrong at this point. He didn't deserve that. There was outside interference. Deku protested. Katsuki smirked at him. You just get spooked easily. Deep down, Katsuki knew part of the reason he won the staring contest was because he'd gotten so wrapped up in Deku's eyes that he hadn't even noticed people yelling until Deku turned around. But no one needed to know that but himself. What did you lose? Todoroki Fang Shoto asked from his seat across from Deku. Staring contest, Deku said. Katsuki heard another of Kirishima's stifled snorts from behind and elbowed him again. But I only lost because there were people yelling outside. Excuses, excuses, you son of a beach. Katsuki didn't know he was going to say it until he said it and Deku burst out laughing. The last part had been added on automatic, a recitation of an old lady neighbor from their childhood. She would invite Katsuki and Deku inside sometimes for cookies and snacks, but she'd always be playing soap operas on her TV. She loved making comments and made her hatred for certain characters clear. She said some phrases so often Katsuki and Deku started using them too. Make up your goddamn mind. Deku practically cackled before breaking into another fit of laughter. It made Katsuki start laughing so hard he was barely angry at how flustered he was becoming and pressed his forehead into the table, trying to breathe through giggles. Why did Deku have to have such a nice laugh? Meanwhile, he was struggling not to squeal like a dying pig. Lying bisudi, Deku said, sounding like he was attempting to do an impression of the old woman but was really just choking on his own cackles. Katsuki put a hand over his mouth and kept trying his damnedest to keep his pride somewhat intact, but when he turned to look at Deku he couldn't help it anymore. Deku, having always been one to show and feel his emotions 100%, was laughing so hard he was falling off the bench. And then Katsuki just watched as he did fall off the bench, giggling too much to even react. Deku, Katsuki managed through deep breaths and laughter, get off the effing ground. It's not that funny. But oh my god, Deku rubbed a hand over his face, sitting up a bit and still shaking. I totally forgot about Grandma Ito. Oh right, that was her name. She would be insulted, he said with a smile he wasn't in control of, nudging Deku's side with his boot and making him laugh again. Do I even ask at this point? Kaminari said, drawing Katsuki's attention away from the adorable mess on the ground to glare at him. Old lady who loved yelling at her TV, Deku said, snickering. Man, now I really want Enpan. When Katsuki's mind immediately went to whether or not he had time to go to the store and get stuff to make Enpan today, he stifled a groan at his own disgustingness. He'd probably have time after therapy. You could get off the ground and eat your F&D lunch, dumbass, Katsuki said, poking Deku with his boot again. Help me. Deku tried again, holding out a hand. I already said I'm not falling for that again. Deku raised an eyebrow. Are you saying I'm strong enough to pull you down? Katsuki was smart enough to know when he was being baited, but dumb and prideful enough to take it anyway. F you, he said, grabbing Deku's hand and pulling him up. As expected, Deku tried to pull back, but Katsuki just bent his arm and yanked his friend forward and to his feet. Happy? Deku smiled at him. Thanks, Kaken. It was only when Deku's hand shifted slightly did he notice that he still was holding it, and he quickly let go. Deku sat back in his seat and was quickly occupied by some conversation with Round Face, and Katsuki turned back to his own lunch, wiping his sweaty palms on his pants leg. Katsuki's therapy session that day felt like the longest he had since he was first forced into them by his teacher and parents. Back then, the sessions were long and painful because he hated them and refused to cooperate for a good while. This time, though, was because there was just so much shit to unpack and backstory to reveal before he could get to actual business of apologizing. His therapist, a very kind woman named Dr. Nakamura who reminded him a lot of his dad, just sat and listened as he eventually managed to tell his story with Deku in the most concise way possible, stopping just before he got to the whole I'm in love with him thing. It was difficult to think that, let alone say it out loud. Why do you want to apologize? Dr. Nakamura asked at one point. Because, Katsuki started, twisting his dad's ring on his finger, he deserves it. And I guess because I want to stop feeling so guilty, though that seems selfish. Katsuki had a momentary feeling of pride in himself, weird timing as it was, because he knew his middle school self would never have said any of this. If he could do shit like this now, say these things out loud instead of burying them deep inside himself and covering them with anger, maybe he had changed enough to deserve Deku. Or at least, he was moving in that direction. Why do you think it's selfish? I shouldn't be doing this for me. I don't want to do it just to prove to him or myself that I deserve his friendship or some shit, or to make myself feel better. I want to do it so he's happy. Then it sounds to me like you have the right intentions here, Dr. Nakamura said, smiling gently in a way he would have found condescending if he didn't know better now. But I also want to add that apologies are meant to heal relationships, and relationships are a two-way street. It's okay to get something out of it, such as relieving your guilt, though it's right to focus on him. It's not like I expect him to accept, Katsuki admitted, still fiddling with the ring, and I think that's the reason I find it so hard to say. How do you mean? If he didn't forgive me, I wouldn't blame him. And I guess I'm also worried that it'll be pulling up old shit he's been ignoring, and he'll think about it and realize that he should have run the other direction the second he saw me again," Katsuki said, staring intently at the potted plant on Nakamura's desk, thoughts starting to drift. Auntie Inko used to have a small potted plant garden in the Midoriya apartment, and he and Deku had been banished from it for knocking nearly every plant over during an overexcited game of keep-away. In their late elementary and early middle school days, though, Katsuki noticed that Deku became a caretaker for the plants, and even named a few of them. The mini porch garden was quite the sight by the time Deku left. That always seemed to be what Deku did: help things grow, nurture them, build them up. Katsuki was often too blinded by his own ego that he didn't notice when he knocked it all down or crushed it, and when he did notice, he didn't care. But for his relationship with Deku to work, in whatever capacity relationship was defined, he needed to use his lane of the two-way street. He needed to be like Deku, to build things up and let them grow. He didn't have to be nice, he had to be kind. It was something his mother told him back in high school, when he was too angry and dumb to realize what she meant. He'd thought she was being stupid, because nice and kind were the same effing thing. But when he thought back on that a few years later, he realized his mother was speaking from experience and that they were not the same thing. His mother was not a very nice woman. She was brash, loud, aggressive, and unwithholding with her brutally honest opinions. But she was kind on some occasions. She never hesitated to help the Midoriyas out when they needed it, taking Deku for nights at a time so Auntie could work or take a break for once in her life. She chided his father for working too late while giving him coffee and fresh baked goods she'd gotten for him that morning. She always offered comfort when it was most needed, and blunt words when they were needed instead. Being nice was not his mother's personality, nor was it Katsuki's. That was fine. They were assholes, and they had the people that, for whatever reason, dealt with them anyways, like his dad and Auntie or Deku and Kirishima. But being kind was something he could do without changing his entire self. If his hag of a mother could do it, he could too. He took a deep breath, feeling a strange knot in his chest loosen ever so slightly, and realized Dr. Nakamura hadn't said anything. Probably letting him think. He appreciated it. I want to be a better person because of him. And isn't that what love feels like? Something whispered from the locked box in his mind where he'd tucked those feelings for the time being. He shoved the thought away. He knew jack shit about love, and being in it didn't change that. I want to deserve his forgiveness, if he gives it to me. Do you feel prepared to be forgiven? Katsuki blinked at her, momentarily taken off guard, then takes another deep breath. I don't know. I think I'm a step or two behind that. Nothing I think means shit if I don't act on it. Dr. Nakamura peered at him over her glasses with her dark, knowing eyes, then shrugged. Then act on it. Katsuki left therapy feeling like a man on a mission. His mission? Be the kindest FANG friend to Deku anyone had ever seen. First step was something he'd already been planning to do. Make Deku Anpan like the kind Grandma Ito or Auntie Inko used to make. He didn't know the exact recipe they used, but he was pretty sure there were only so many versions of FING bread and bean paste a person could make. He stopped by the grocery store on his way home, gathering all his ingredients and a few other things he needed. At one point, he passed through the aisle with all the instant noodles and microwave meals and was hit with the memory of all those days as a dorky preteen with Deku, hanging out at each other's homes late into the evening because both of their parents were working. They always ended up making some kind of instant ramen or cup of noodles from the konbini, eating in the living room or on a bed while playing video games, knowing full well they'd be in trouble if their parents found out. And here he was getting sappy over FNG instant ramen. How dare Deku do this to him? When he got home, he set right to work, knowing Anpan took a lot of waiting for things to boil or dough to rise. During the waiting PRDs, he worked on homework and thought about other things he could do to be a kinder friend. He briefly wondered if being kind was something that was supposed to come naturally, but brushed that off quickly. He thought maybe people like Deku were born kind, but it was entirely impossible that his mother was. Working towards sheet and making a conscious effort was just as good as doing it naturally, if not better. So, he'd make a conscious effort. And that started with calling Deku after setting the bean paste-filled ball of dough to the side to rise. Deku picked up on the third ring with a bright, "Hi Kaken," before Katsuki could even say anything. How excited Deku sounded made him almost forget he was supposed to be starting a conversation here. "Hey got a minute?" he said, leaning nonchalantly on his kitchen counter like Deku could see him or something. "Where to?" "Sure," Deku chirped. "I need a break from homework." "What's up?" "Nothing, just wanted to talk," Katsuki answered with what he hoped was a cool and level voice. "How was your first day?" "It was great, thanks for asking," Deku said, and Katsuki could hear his smile. "Well, great but exhausting. The things they say about UA are all true. It is hard." Katsuki laughed a bit at Deku's groaning. "No shit, that's why I'm here. It's one of the top schools in the country for a reason." "Yes, and I'm very grateful to be here, of course. I think things will get better once I catch up. These classes are a little ahead of my old school, so I'm stuck reading 5 chapters in this textbook I only got today. My general psych teacher is super strict, though, so I have to." "Good luck with that. What's your major, by the way?" Katsuki asked, realizing he hadn't heard Deku say it before, and hoping that was just because he hadn't mentioned it, not because Katsuki hadn't listened. "Psychology," Deku answered, sounding very excited. "I think I want an emphasis on cognitive psychology, but I figured I can learn about other stuff for a bit before diving into one thing. I have a tendency to get obsessed with things, and I'm trying to keep this obsession on a broader spectrum for the time being." Deku chuckled, like he's laughing at himself. So, Deku's going to do the stuff Dr. Nakamura does. It made sense. Deku was always analyzing people, and he was pretty good at reading people and talking them through things as long as he wasn't super nervous around them. "What about you? Don't think you've mentioned it before." "Chemical engineering," Katsuki said. "Ah, still a science nerd." Katsuki glared at his phone, which was on speaker on his kitchen counter. "You're the nerd." Deku laughed. "I know. Chemical engineering sounds interesting. What kind of jobs can you do with that?" "I'm interested in the medical or environmental side of it," Katsuki answered. It felt good to talk with Deku like this. These were the kind of things they might have talked about in high school, discussing futures or colleges they wanted to apply to. He and Deku talked for a while about their studies, Katsuki managing to turn the conversation away from his sheet to Deku's. He hit the jackpot when his questions led to Deku start happy ranting about one of his teachers, some renowned psychologist named Dr. Yagi Toshinori. Some of the stuff he said was interesting, but Katsuki was mainly content with listening to him talk about it. He wasn't going to lie and say he could listen to Deku rant for hours, because patience was a virtue he'd been blessed with so little of not even Deku could get an infinite amount from him, but he was definitely willing to let Deku talk about whatever was interesting him for the time being. An hour passed before he knew it, and the anpan had been baked and was now on the counter to cool. "Didn't you say you had a textbook to read?" Katsuki said, knowing he also had homework to get back to. Deku groaned dramatically. "Yeah, I should probably get back to that. Ugh. Have fun with your brainy sheet, nerd. See you tomorrow." "Thanks, Kaken. See you." Katsuki hung up, smiling to the privacy of his dorm room, then turned to glare at the anpan. "You better if ain't taste good," he grumbled at them before going to finish his homework. It was only during the next day's lunch break did he realize he hadn't thought about actually giving the sweet rolls to Deku. He could just be chill about it, but if Deku tackled him like he did yesterday, there might be a problem. Thankfully, he got there before Deku, claiming his same spot as yesterday, then setting the Tupperware of anpan on the table in front of him. He immediately had to slap Kaminari's hand away. "Nope." Kaminari pouted at him. "What? Why not?" "Not yours, dumbass," Katsuki snapped. Another thing he failed to think of, his idiot friends. He wasn't stupid. He knew that his feelings for Deku, to an extent, were obvious enough for at least some of his friends to notice, but he did not want them to start getting ideas. This was not an attempt at courting. He didn't need any more offers of wingmaning, and even worse, he didn't need them meddling on their own accord. They would probably have good intentions, but that could seriously F things up. Hopefully, Kirishima would handle them. "Kaken." Deku called loudly, waving a lanky arm above his head wildly, wearing a FING All Might hoodie. He jogged up the grassy hill, Half-C and Four Eyes behind him. Round Face and her girlfriend were already at a table, chatting with Mina. This is a friendship thing, so don't start, Katsuki hissed to Kirishima next to him as Deku approached, not giving time for a response before grabbing the box of Anpan and holding it out to Deku. Here. Deku blinked down at the box, seeming lost. What's this? Katsuki pushed the box further towards Deku, making him take it. Anpan, obviously. For me. Katsuki suppressed an exasperated groan. Deku was really intent on making this. Difficult for him, huh? Why else would I be giving it to you, dummy? Deku blinked at him with his dumb bright eyes, then broke into a grin. Oh, thank you. Yeah, Katsuki managed. Deku sat down, smiling at the box like it was something far more special than FNG bread, and Katsuki celebrated a bit internally. Did you make these? It took Katsuki a second to register the question, because apparently nowadays Deku smiling at him made his brain lag like a computer from the early 90s. Yeah, it's not that hard. Deku gave him an impressed look, so much like the one he had when they were kids it was doing things to Katsuki's heart. Wow. Deku said, grinning, that's so cool. Last time I tried to help my mom make these I got kicked out of the kitchen. Katsuki snorted a laugh at that. Deku must have really F'd it up if Auntie Inko, the world's most patient woman, kicked him out. Of course you did. We can't all be good at everything, Kaken, Deku shot back with a mock glare. You're good at plenty of shit, Katsuki said, another conscious effort made. I'm just better, he added, because he'd already said there wasn't going to be some massive personality change here. Besides, competition was a pillar of his and Deku's friendship, he didn't have to give that up. Deku stuck his tongue out, and then lunch went on as normal, friends talking and shouting at each other across tables. Katsuki didn't miss the looks he was getting from Shiro, Kaminari, and Mina, though, and he might have to deal with those later. But for now, he was content with today's victory, ready for the next thing. And then he glanced over at Deku for probably the millionth time and found him tearing up half-eaten roll in his hand. Deku, are you effing crying? He asked, almost incredulous and slightly concerned. Deku crying didn't automatically mean something bad, everything made the nerd cry, but Katsuki still had no idea how to deal with it. No, Deku said, wiping his eyes with his free hand. Round Face leaned over the table and frowned at him. Izuku, are you okay? Deku sniffled loudly, wiping his leaky eyes on his hoodie sleeve now. Sorry. I just miss my mom. Round Face looked confused, but Katsuki nearly breathed a sigh of relief. Okay, that was actually a good thing. Well, no, it isn't that Deku missed Auntie that much, but it meant Katsuki had succeeded in making Anpan as good as she used to. Deku was stuffing the Anpan in his mouth now, still crying, and Katsuki couldn't figure out how he thought it was endearing instead of gross, but Round Face and all their other friends were starting to look increasingly concerned for Deku's sanity. His mom used to make us Anpan all the time, Katsuki offered, since Deku was in no position to explain right now. Great, now he was feeling nostalgic and missing Auntie too. She'd practically been his third parent. Maybe she'd come visit Deku sometime. He awkwardly reached out to pat Deku's head, feeling how soft his green curls were and accidentally making Deku cry harder. Holy F dash, Deku, pull yourself together. I'm trying. Deku wailed. This is your fault. I made you some dimmin bread. Special bread. Deku blubbered like that meant anything, wiping his face with his sleeves again. Before Katsuki could even start thinking of a response, Deku was out of his seat and wrapping Katsuki in a warm, almost familiar hug. It was a strange angle, seeing as he was still sitting, but Katsuki reached up to pat Deku's back in an attempt to placate him. Thank you, Kaken, Deku said into his shoulder. Yeah, sure, you sentimental crybaby, Katsuki grumbled. Were all future attempts at kindness going to be met with tears? He probably should have expected this. Deku snorted quietly, standing up again and taking a deep breath. I'm okay now. Deku sniffled, then let out a tiny laugh. I cry too much. I need to call my mom. Ugh. Katsuki half laughed, half scoffed at him. All right, Deku smiled at him, dopey and friendly and kind and somehow special, and Katsuki was close to smiling back before the moment was cut short by a loud All Might cartoon theme song. Deku's eyes widened in surprise and he fished his phone out of his back pocket, clicking something and turning the very nostalgia-inducing alarm off. I gotta go, I have a meeting with Aizawa-sensei, Deku said, turning around to scoop all his things back into his backpack. Bye everyone. Sorry for crying. And thanks again, Kaken. Deku was rattling off sentences so fast Katsuki had just processed what he said when Deku leaned down to kiss the top of his head and rushed off back towards the school building. The lagging computer that was Katsuki's brain fully crashed and shut down. Motherfucking F dash. Bakugou, Mina said, making him start to come back to himself. How did you of all people ever become friends with someone so sweet? He's adorable. Katsuki pulled himself together enough to know he should glare at her for that, so he did. Shut up. Oh my god, I think he's broken, Ciro muttered, sounding way too amused. Round Face snickered, and the reminder that Deku's friends were also witnessing this shocked him all the way back. F you, he yelled. Leave him alone, guys, Kirishima said. Katsuki appreciated the attempt, but it was useless. He should probably deal with this now before any sheet happened. Look, Katsuki snapped, standing to glare at the combined groups of friends. Dashed. He cut himself off with a deep breath, trying to calm the growing anger that was stemming from the embarrassment. I know that you all can tell that Deku. What the hell, that made no sense, Katsuki. Never mind, he grumbled, face heating. This was fing humiliating. But I'm telling you right now, do not try to interfere or some sheet. There is sheet that needs to be dealt with. The teasing smiles were gone now, replaced by confusion and concern. Katsuki hated being looked at with concern, but he shoved the anger down again. That's all. Bye. Katsuki snagged his bag off the ground and stalked off, knowing he was leaving Kirishima behind to deal but trusting him enough to not care. By the time he got to his dorm room that evening after classes, he'd sorted himself out enough to send Kirishima a quick text. Shitty hair. Sorry for leaving you to deal with them earlier. It's okay dude, I got you, smiley face, and don't worry, nothing private was revealed and they all promised not to play matchmaker or anything. Even Mina, which is saying something. Thanks. Katsuki went to turn off his phone but was suddenly hit with the realization that he hadn't called his parents in a couple weeks. Deku's lunch breakdown probably reminded him. No time like the present. He called his dad, but, as expected, his mother answered, having probably snatched her husband's phone as soon as she saw his name come up. Katsuki, you little brat, she yelled. About time you called. I was starting to think you forgot about us. Whatever, hag, Katsuki huffed. I'm calling now. How've you been, Katsuki? His dad said, slightly muffled. Fine. Pretty good, actually, except for all the fing feelings. Oh, hey, forgot to tell you, his mother said. Remember little Izuku? He's transferring to your school. Inko called me the other day. Old news, hag. I know, I saw him last week. Did you say hi? His dad asked, sounding hopeful. His dad and Deku always seemed to get along. Katsuki had done a little more than said hi, seeing as he tackled Deku immediately, but that was irrelevant. Yeah, and I've hung out with him every day since then, he said, not sure why he was being so honest. That's great, kid, his dad responded. I remember you two crazies as kiddos, always coming up with new shit to destroy our house with, his mom said, barking a laugh. She didn't seem to think it was so funny back then, but okay. After that, the conversation turned to whatever boring stuff his parents had been up to and his school life. By the time they were about to hang up, Katsuki had talked himself into something probably stupid. Wait, Mom, can I talk to you for a minute? He said before he could stop himself. Mom? His mom said, all right, guess this is important. Beat it, honey. Bye, Katsuki, his dad said. I love you. Love you too, Dad, Katsuki grumbled. Okay, now shoo, his mom snapped. What do you need, kid? Remember when you told me, you don't have to be nice, you have to be kind? There was a moment's pause, Then his mother said, "Sure I do. I've decided to try that out," Katsuki said, sighing. "And, I was wondering how you did it." "You asking me for advice, Katsuki?" Katsuki groaned, wanting to throw his phone across the room. "Yes. I'm flattered. Let me think for a second." Katsuki waited for her to talk, bouncing his leg with slight nervous energy. "It ain't easy being kind to everyone," his mom finally said. "That's the part you work. But the easier part, the part that's also easier to work for, is being good to the people you care about. The big thing is, you're probably going to F up sometimes. I can almost guarantee it because you're too much like me, kid. But if you want to be good to someone, just follow your heart. There ain't exactly a guidebook. Follow his heart." That was some of the cheesiest shit he'd ever heard, and it came from his FNG mother. And she was totally right. FING hell. "Thanks, Mom," he conceded. "No problem, kid, I'm proud of you. Don't take so long to call next time. I love you." "Love you too," Katsuki mumbled before hanging up. Follow his heart, huh? He could FING do that. Izuku had eaten over half the box of anpan Kaken gave him by the time he finished his homework that evening. He couldn't help it. They were probably the best things he'd ever tasted, and he wasn't sure if it was because of his homesicknesses, because Kaken made them, or because Kaken made them for him, presumably because he offhandedly mentioned wanting them. The last option made him warm and fuzzy inside. He forced himself to put the lid back on the Tupperware and tuck the anpan into the fridge, saving some for later, and knowing he should probably eat an actual dinner. He wondered if Kaken could bake anything else or cook. Auntie Mitsuki had always been a great cook. Kaken probably learned from her. Maybe Kaken could cook for him someday, he thought slightly dreamily. He stared into his nearly empty fridge for a second, and decided that that fantasy had merit for more than just watching Kaken cook. He could get an actual meal. Of course, he could always try cooking himself, but why spend time trying that when he could just microwave a cup of noodles thing and watch old All Might reruns on YouTube? He watched the container rotate slowly in the microwave, stifling a yawn and checking the time. It was nearing midnight. Did Kaken still go to sleep so early? If he did, how in the world did he get all his work done too? Izuku felt like he was drowning in all the reading and assignments, interesting as he found them. Izuku slumped into his desk chair with his noodles and chopsticks, pulling up some old superhero analysis video he'd probably watched 100 times. The familiarity of the video was comforting, but it also meant his mind quickly blurred it into background noise and started to drift. As to be expected, it landed back on Kaken. He was acting different, but somehow still the same. Middle school Kaken would have never admitted to caring about him. Middle school Kaken would have never called to ask about his day out of the blue. Middle school Kaken would have never made him nostalgic desserts because of one throwaway sentence. Middle school Kaken would have shoved him off instead of hugging him back when he was crying. But Kaken was still calling him a crybaby and a nerd, still challenging him on things, still being Kaken. Just a version of Kaken that was making these feelings a lot harder to ignore. Izuku groaned, slurping up noodles and slumping further into his seat. If Kaken kept this up, he knew there would be no more tamping down old feelings. For heck's sake, he could hardly control himself as it was. He kissed Kaken's head today, and then practically ran away. He momentarily considered trying to distance himself a bit, but that was met with vehement denial from every other part of him. Sure, that might make these feelings lessen, but 1. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. If seeing Kaken after all these years taught him anything, and 2, that would hurt way too much. He had just got Kaken back, he wasn't pushing him away. Especially not when Kaken was seemingly making attempts to reach back to him, another thing he didn't used to do. Besides, the feeling were mostly good ones, if not tinged with a little hopelessness, so he could deal. He'd take everything Kaken could give, he always had. He wouldn't ask for more than that, though, even if he wanted it. He sighed, smiling a bit despite himself and finishing off his noodles before going to toss the container. He tried to hold back for a second, but gave in easily and quickly snatched another roll from his fridge, warming it in the microwave before eating it. Kaken would probably hate that he was using the microwave instead of his oven. As a last thought, he took a quick selfie of himself holding up the anpan and sent it to Kaken with another thank you and a good night. He forced himself not to care that he looked a total sleepy mess in it and flopped into bed, doubting that Kaken would be awake to respond. He fell asleep with the lingering taste of anpan and warm feeling in his chest. Izuku woke up to the blaring of his alarm clock, feeling around on his side table until he clicked it off and got out of bed. He stretched a bit, then went to make himself a bowl of cereal and check his phone. Kaken. Laughing face. What the F, Deku go to sleep earlier? Izuku chuckled to himself. Yep, same old Kaken. Good morning to you too, Kaken. Smartass. Were you doing homework? Yes, angry face so. Many readings. You were smart enough to get into this school, so I have no pity for you. But I do think you should even sleep more. You realize most people our age usually stay up past 9, right? I go to bed at 10. Izuku laughed, louder this time. Wow, Kaken, what a bad boy be. Shut the F up. Izuku was laughing uncontrollably into his cereal now, leaning over the counter and trying not to choke. And you say I'm the nerd. Call me a hitting nerd again, I dare you. You're a nerd. The next thing Kaken sent was a picture he took in his bathroom mirror, glaring at Izuku with a toothbrush hanging out of his mouth while flipping him off. He was wearing a headband that pushed his hair off his forehead and a pair of reading glasses, and the domesticity of it all made Izuku's heart flutter as he laughed. Again. Of course, he immediately saved the photo and set it as Kaken's profile picture. Okay. I take it back. You're very badass and not nerdy at all. Demon right. Gotta go, see you at lunch. See ya, Kaken. Laughing face. Izuku stared at the picture for a little longer than he'd like to admit before finally putting his phone down and setting about his day. The glasses weren't something he'd seen before, and he did not understand the way they made him feel, but that was irrelevant. Also, he knows he reads into things a lot, and often makes connections that aren't really there, but the photo feels like a good representation of how Kaken's been acting. Still his same old self, but a little softer. Kaken would hit him over the head if he heard Izuku call him sweet, but it was exactly that. Izuku startled a bit, realizing he'd gotten lost in his thoughts and had to make it to an early lecture. He got dressed as quickly as he could, snagging the first hoodie he found and rushing out of his dorm. He only took 3 wrong turns this time, which was an improvement. The UA campus was a lot bigger than his old school. He made it to his lecture just in time, only a minute before the professor got there, introducing herself as Kayama Namuri. She had some interesting theories. Izuku went through the rest of his day like that, jogging around campus to get to places on time and almost getting lost far too many times. Thankfully, he had a few classes with Tsuyu, so she helped him around a bit. They ended walking to lunch together, too, which was nice. He waved excitedly upon approaching the tables and seeing that Kaken had made it before him again, calling out to them and making Kaken look up. As he got closer, he noticed that Kaken's eyes had gone wider and he was staring at Izuku's hoodie, looking confused or angry. Izuku couldn't tell. Kaken? Kaken looked up at him, definitely glaring now. Deku. What the F dash? What? Izuku asked nervously, stopping. UFNG stole that? For 5 years. Wait, what? Izuku blinked at him for a second, then looked down at his hoodie and froze. It was a dark navy blue all-might hoodie with the bright yellow insignia on the front, an older design, and Izuku suddenly remembered that it definitely used to be Kaken's. Kaken had ordered it secondhand, so it had been a bit too big back then, but it was a perfect fit for current Izuku. He either stole it or it got left at his house at one point, then never made it back. Izuku slowly looked up to find Kaken still glaring at him and liked his lips nervously. I didn't mean to? How the hell do you steal my sheet accidentally? I'm sorry. I probably thought it was mine. Izuku said, taking a step backwards. I looked for that for months. Kaken yelled, give it back. Finders keepers, though, Izuku said, consciously digging his own grave and grinning. Kaken stood up, menacing, and Izuku decided to book it right then and there, dropping his bag before he did. He sprinted towards one of the buildings on campus, skidding around a corner and knowing his longer legs were giving him the advantage here, but that would definitely tire before Kaken did. Oh well, he accepted his fate. Deku! Kaken yelled from behind him, making him yelp and turn another corner, back onto a grassy area. He took off towards a hill, then suddenly his feet flew out from under him as he slipped on a patch of muddy grass and hit the ground. He scrambled to stand, but his fall gave Kakin time to catch up, and the second he was on his feet he was tackled back to the grass. He yelped again, twisting around and putting a hand on Kakin's face to try and shove him back. Kakin grabbed his wrists and pushed them down, pinning them, but Izuku wasn't giving up. He really likes this hoodie and he still had legs. He kicked Kakin's thigh, making the knee he was holding himself up on go straight so Kakin toppled slightly off balance, and used that momentum to free one of his arms. Kakin grabbed his hand to push it back down, and they grappled back and forth in an almost standstill for a second. Izuku couldn't help but start smiling, looking up at Kakin and raising an eyebrow. Then, for some reason, Kakin's push weakened enough for Izuku to shove him back and flip them around, sitting right on Kakin's stomach and pinning him down. Streak broken, Kakin, he announced victoriously, leaning over Kakin and grinning. The hoodie is mine now. Kakin blinked up at him, and Izuku wondered if Kakin usually got so red from running around. His cheeks were flushed deep pink. He also didn't respond. Izuku stopped himself from leaning closer, seeing what happened last time he did that, but was still concerned. Kakin? Hello. He waved a hand in front of his friend's face when Kakin just opened his mouth slightly but didn't say anything. Get off, Kakin finally said, sounding hoarse. Not until you admit defeat, Izuku said, though he lessened his weight on Kakin a bit. He didn't want to be attacked the second he got off, but he didn't want to suffocate Kakin or anything. Okay, you can have it, Kakin conceded. Yay! Izuku beamed at him and rolled off to the side, then jumped to his feet. Don't worry, we can share it. They used to share clothes all the time, mostly Kakin's. Izuku's were too weird for Kakin to want to wear. He personally thought his fashion sense was hilarious and perfectly fine, thank you very much. A shirt that said pants on it was the pinnacle of humor and class. After a second he realized Kakin hadn't moved, so he tapped him with his shoe. Kakin, you can stand now. He was acting really weird again. Kakin blinked again and looked up at him, then shook his head and got to his feet. He was still flushed pink. Izuku frowned at him, then turned to look for their table. Wait, where are we? Kakin cleared his throat, then pointed towards the building Izuku had run around. They're back over there. Oh okay. Let's go then, I'm hungry. He glanced back to find Kakin still staring at him, and felt his cheeks heat up. This was all very weird, and he needed to get out before he imploded from how flustered he was becoming. Race you, he shouted, then took off in a sprint. He raced around the building and up the small hill to their picnic tables, skidding to a stop and slamming his hand down on one of them, startling his friends. I win. Kakin stopped behind him, glaring and still pink in the face. Pfuff. That's bad sportsmanship, Kakin, Izuku chided. Now show me your lunch, I want to steal your snacks. My clothes aren't enough for you? Never. Izuku cackled, feeling giddy for some reason. Greedy bee, Kakin grumbled, sitting down in the same spot as yesterday. Izuku took his own seat, leaning over the distance between tables to look into Kakin's bag. Kakin pushed him back. Chill out, Deku. Did you two wrestle again? Mina asked with a smile that made Izuku a tad nervous. Yeah, and I won, so this is my hoodie now, he answered, pulling the hood up and grinning. How do you decide who wins? Tsuyu asked, tilting her head. Whoever gets pinned down for 5 seconds loses, Izuku explained. He heard quiet laughter and turned to see Shiro and Kaminari snickering into their hands. What's funny? Nothing, they're just idiots, Kakin interrupted before his friends could answer. Kakin tossed something at him, which he barely caught. You still like those, right? Izuku opened his hands to find that Kakin had given him a pack of Kiri no Tane and smiled. Yeah, thanks. He met Kakin's eyes for a moment, then suddenly Kakin reached out and yanked on the drawstrings of his hood, pulling it around his face and blocking his vision. Kakin. He managed to open the hood so he could see again and found Kakin smirking at his food. Rude, he grumbled before getting to his own lunch, still smiling. Later that evening, while he was doing homework and snacking on chips, Kakin called him again. The picture from this morning showed up fully on his screen. It was almost embarrassing how fast he went to grab his phone, accidentally knocking it off the table and lunging out of his chair to catch it before it hit the ground, yelping. "Deku?" the phone said, making him squeak in surprise and click speakerphone. Apparently, his mad dash to catch his phone had picked up Kaken's call. At least it didn't hang up. "Hi," he chirped, getting back into his seat. "Sorry about that, I knocked my phone off the table." He dusted chip dust of his phone and liked it off his fingers, knowing full well how Kaken would react if he could see him. He would be disgusted. Kaken laughed. "Still clumsy, huh? Well, I tripped over my shoelaces last time we hung out. That should answer your question," Izuku said, feeling his face warm at the memory. "Anyways, what's up?" "Nothing," Kaken said. "Same as last time. How was your day?" Izuku blushed harder and pressed his forehead onto his desk, smiling like an idiot. Kaken was going to kill him with this. "It was good. I got a new hoodie," he joked. "Okay, you," Katsuki responded, making him laugh. "Thieving a-hole. I can't believe you took it in the first place." Izuku sat up and smiled at his phone. "Kaken, there was so much All Might merch and shared clothes between the both of us, I feel like it was inevitable. I bet you have some of my stuff still." He wouldn't be surprised if he left a few shirts after sleepovers or during those times he got his clothes dirty and Kaken let him borrow stuff. And they had multiple pairs of identical All Might hoodies and shirts, though Kaken always refused to match with him. "Well, if I do, it's mine now, according to your finders keepers, but..." "Hey, I fought you for it fair and square," Izuku protested. "Fine. I'll fight you for whatever sheet I might find." "Deal. How was your day, Kaken?" "Some a-hole stole my clothes." Izuku laughed again. Kaken talked about his classes for a bit, saying a lot of very smart chemistry and math things Izuku didn't totally understand but was impressed by anyways. They went back and forth after that, and it was so much like those nothing conversations they used to have. The conversations you have with close friends, just content to talk and joke and not have it mean anything specific. Izuku loved it. "By the way, do you have any weekend plans?" Kaken asked after a while. "Don't think so," Izuku answered, "besides the inevitable homework." "How about you?" "I'm going hiking on Saturday," Kaken said. Kaken likes hiking now? He always did love the outdoors, especially when they were young. "That sounds fun." "Where?" "There's a cool place about a 45-minute drive from here." Kaken cleared his throat quietly into the phone, then added, "Want to come with?" If Izuku had been holding anything at that moment, which he thankfully wasn't, he would have dropped it and probably created quite the commotion. Instead, his mind just wiped blank for a second, and then the more logical part of his brain whacked him upside the head with a big OL. "Kaken is not asking you on a date, stupid." What he was asking was multiple hours of presumably just the two of them, but that was normal and Izuku could handle it. "Deku?" Izuku startled, realizing he had just left Kaken hanging. "Oops. Yeah. Sorry about that." "Yes, that sounds really fun." "Cool. I'll pick you up at 8. Izuku blinked at his phone in a moment of disbelief. 8 in the morning? On a weekend? Kaken snorted a laugh. "Yeah. That's so early." Izuku ummed, draping his top half over his desk like a dramatic actor to the audience of absolutely no one. "Get up, Death. Maybe we can do a sunrise hike instead." "No," Izuku said quickly, jolting upright. 8 is fine. Dear God, how are you conscious enough to exercise before sunrise?" "Sheer force of will," Kaken answered, totally serious. Kaken is strong and also insane. "Yeah, I am, and The rest of the week passed in a blur of essays, textbook chapters, study sessions with friends, and seeing Kaken every day at lunch and calling him in the evenings. Every time so far, Kaken had been the one to call him, which was mind-blowing in its own small way. Because Kaken was reaching out to him, on purpose, without Izuku even having to say anything. He was finally starting to be convinced that yes, Kaken did want to talk to him that much, and yes, he could call first and it wouldn't be weird. Saturday rang in with the sound of his alarm clock way too early for a Saturday, but he forced himself out of bed with a smile because he was spending this god-awful time of the morning with Kaken. He sleepily made his way around his dorm as he fixed himself a small breakfast and brushed his teeth. He also probably stared at himself in the mirror for a full couple minutes, debating whether he should even try with the mess of curls on top of his head. He decided no when he asked himself why he even cared. He didn't feel like answering that. Soon after, there was a knock on the door, and he flung it open a little too excitedly and mustered up his brightest, "Good morning, Kaken." Kaken blinked up at him, looking a little taken aback. "What happened to this is too early?" Izuku grinned at him, putting his hands on his hips in a mock superhero pose. "I am very tired, but I'm using my sheer force of will, like you said." Kaken snorted a laugh. "All right, dork. Do you have a water bottle?" Izuku stared at him for a second. "One moment, please." He quickly closed the door in Kaken's face, hearing him laugh again, then went to fill up a water bottle and grab a warmer sweatshirt like the one Kaken was wearing. It was fall, after all, which meant it would be cold. He opened the door again, smiling at a Kaken who looked thoroughly amused. I had this the whole time. Once an idiot, always an idiot. Let's go." Izuku followed Kaken out into the hall, locking his door behind him then jogging to catch up. "Sorry I'm not a Boy Scout like you. I bet you have way too much stuff for one hike in your car." Kaken hip-checked him, making him laugh. "Being prepared is a good thing." "Sure is," Izuku said, draping an arm around Kaken's shoulder almost unconsciously. "That's why I bring a Kaken with me everywhere I go. They always have everything I need." "A Kaken?" Kaken repeated, tilting his head to glare up at Izuku and very much not pushing his arm off. "Screw you, I'm one of a kind." "Then I guess I'm pretty lucky to have you at all," Izuku said, smiling in the uncontrollable way he did around Kaken. Especially being so close to him. Kaken was very warm, he noted, something that hadn't changed over the years. And Izuku was really starting to like his height advantage. Kaken was anything but small, but he was short enough to fit right into Izuku's side like this. "Demon right you are, Deku," Kaken said. Izuku snickered, then reluctantly dropped his arm off Kaken's shoulders so they could walk through the door out to the parking lot and get in Kaken's black car. It was very Kaken, simple, dark, clean. Very clean. Did Kaken not ever eat in his car? What kind of person has a car this clean? "Where exactly are we going again?" Izuku asked once Kaken got in the driver's seat next to him. "Mount Takao," Kaken answered, turning the car on. "It's nearby and pretty cool." Izuku smiled again at Kaken's interest in something new. "Do you hike often nowadays?" Kaken pulled out of the parking spot and started out of the parking lot. "Yeah. It's relaxing." "Relaxed? You've changed, Kaken," Izuku joked, making Kaken shoot him a glare. Deku," Kaken said, but he didn't sound bothered whatsoever. Izuku snickered, then turned to prop his elbow up on the car door handle, resting his chin on his hand and looking out the window. He'd grown up in Mustafa, but there were definitely changes in the past 5 years. They passed a few shops and restaurants he'd never seen before. A lot of other stuff was still the same. When they drove up on a highway that let him get a bird's eye view of a big chunk of the city, he could even make out his and Kaken's old elementary school. He squinted out the window, trying to find the small park he knew used to lay a few blocks away, but he could only see a few patches of green between the houses. He and Kaken used to spend entire afternoons at that park when they were young kids, playing on swing sets or digging in the sandbox. He wondered if they could even both still fit in that sandbox. Probably not. Might be fun to try. Kaken used to dump shovelfuls of sand on his head whenever he was annoying him, so maybe he could return the favor. "What are you laughing at?" Kaken asked, making Izuku realize he'd snickered out loud at that thought. He backed away from the window, leaning back into his seat. "Just thinking," he answered. "Remember that old park we used to hang out at?" "Yeah, haven't been there in years though." "Well, I remembered you dunking me in the sand and thought maybe I could get you back," Izuku said, smiling and raising an eyebrow. Kaken snorted. "Revenge best served cold, huh? You can FING try." If Kaken weren't driving at that moment, Izuku would have punched his shoulder. "Maybe I will." "Watch yourself, Kaken." "What, you gonna go get sand somewhere just to dump it on me?" "That's for me to find out and you to also find out," Izuku said, feigning a dramatic tone. Kaken laughed again. He really liked making Kaken laugh. Both of us will go on that journey of discovery together. You have the dumbest sense of humor of anyone I have ever known, Kaken said. Well, you're laughing, so what does that say about you? Izuku said, declining to mention that he only had this much smooth humor and confidence around Kaken. He was easier to talk to. I'm laughing at you, not with you, Kaken corrected, smirking. Pretty sure my mom told me it's the other way around, so, Izuku said, drawing another laugh. My mom would never lie to me, Kaken. And then Kaken actually giggled, and Izuku forgot any follow-up he might have had. You need to shut up, Kaken said, laughter filling his voice. You need to focus on the road, Izuku shot back, smiling. Meanwhile, I'm gonna figure out how to turn on your radio. He reached out to the dials on the car dash, but his hand was immediately slapped away. Do not effing touch those, you're cursed clumsy but is gonna break something, Kaken said, pushing away his second attempt. How can I break your radio? Izuku bemoaned, I'm not that bad. Still don't trust you. Here. Kaken pressed a button and turned one of the knobs, and an old song Izuku recognized from his mom's love for 80s music filled the car. Within minutes, Izuku was singing along with every song that came on. Kaken gave up on stopping him after he'd kept singing with the radio turned off. Better if the actual singers can drown you out, oh my god. Izuku caught him smiling. By the time Kaken parked the car in front of a trailhead, Izuku had settled to just swaying back and forth in his seat and sometimes muttering lyrics. Kaken shut the radio off with the rest of the car, smirking at his pout in response. Come, get your butt moving, Kaken said, opening his door and exiting the car. Izuku got out and joined him at the trailhead map, coming up just behind him and making him realize he could rest his chin on Kaken's head if he went on his tiptoes a bit. That would probably get him yelled at, though, so he didn't. Not now, at least. There was nowhere to run. All right, let's go. Kaken started off onto the trail, having apparently chosen his path. Izuku was glad he wouldn't have to deal with directions. They walked in silence for a while, Izuku keeping his marveling to himself because he knew Kaken liked peace and quiet sometimes. The mountain woods were amazing, the fresh air was crisp and cool, and he was hanging out with Kaken. He could be content in silence for a while. His curious nature got the better of him, though, when he noticed a narrow side path leading straight down to a little creek. Exploration always made things more fun. Izuku knew full well that attitude had earned him a few of his scars, but he was always open to the slight risk. He cut off towards the path and cautiously started to make his way down the steep decline. Deku, what are you doing? Adventure. Izuku answered, not looking back out of fear of slipping. It was muddier than he thought it would be, then he remembered it rained last night. One foot started to slip, so he quickly jumped and stumbled down the rest, skidding to a stop at the creek. He turned, grinning, to find Kaken staring down at him from the main trail. Come on, Kaken. Why would I do that? Kaken deadpanned. Izuku raised an eyebrow and brought his fists to his hips. What? You scared or something? Kaken glared at him, then stepped forward and slid down the small muddy decline with perfect balance, almost like he was snowboarding. Shut up, he snapped when he reached the bottom. Very smooth, Kaken. Izuku smiled, then turned back to the small creek and hopped onto one of the rocks, windmilling his arms a bit to keep balanced. Deku, you're gonna slip and fall on your butt. Only probably. Izuku said brightly, gearing himself up for the next rocks a little further away. I'm not dealing with you complaining about being cold. I won't complain then. Izuku jumped to the next rocks, landing with a foot on one rock each, squawking indignantly when he almost slipped. Besides, I'm not gonna fall, he assured Kaken, though he nearly just had. He yelped a bit at the next jump, landed precariously on the other side of the creek, just barely not falling backwards into the water. Boom! He declared victoriously, turning to face Kaken again. Success! Kaken was smiling at him, a slightly crooked, very soft smile, and Izuku warmed from the inside at the look. Now it's your turn, he said, gesturing to the rocks. To his surprise, Kaken's smile didn't drop at his challenge, he just shook his head and snorted in quiet laughter. Fing watch me, Deku. With that, Kaken leapt forward and hopped from stone to stone, making it to the other side with a lot better balance than Izuku had. He did stumble a bit on the landing, so Izuku didn't feel too much like a gangly mess. He was mostly just impressed. "Very impressive, Kaken," he chirped, clapping his hands in quick applause. "You have proven yourself a true adventurer." "I swear, you haven't changed since we were 5, Kaken said, still smiling that small smile. "Okay, 1, my teacher says it's a good thing to nurture the child within," Izuku said, earning a tiny laugh. "And 2, there are a couple things that have changed. For instance this." He punctuated his last sentence by reaching out to pat Kaken's head to accentuate his own tallness, ruffling the soft blonde spikes a bit as he did. Then he immediately turned and scrambled his way back across the river, miraculously making it across and back up to the trail without falling. He whipped around to find Kaken right on his heels, but suddenly Kaken misstepped and started to fall. Izuku lunged forward, grabbing Kaken's hand and pulling him upright before he fell backwards. "Kaken, are you okay?" he yelped, pulling Kaken all the way back up to the flat trail. Kaken stared at him with wide eyes for a second, flushed slightly pink again, then blinked and licked his lips. "Yeah." Izuku was momentarily startled that Kaken wasn't yelling at him for the tease or the offer of help, then grinned. "Good. Let's keep going. Maybe we'll find more adventures." It was only when they got all the way back to the bottom of the mountain did Izuku realize he had kept holding Kaken's hand. Katsuki wasn't entirely sure if inviting Deku on a hike was the best or worst idea he had ever had. Because Deku had helped him up the stupid mud hill, and then seemed to completely forget that they were holding hands. And then Deku continued to not let go of his hand. The whole time. He wanted to scream, he wanted to kiss him, and he really needed a pillow to shove his face into before he exploded. Thankfully, Deku didn't start many more conversations during the hike, meaning he could get by on monosyllabic replies to his excited comments about birds and mushrooms and sheet. Why did he have to have such sweaty effing hands? Deku didn't seem to notice, though, or didn't care if he did. Deku's hand wasn't nearly as clammy as Katsuki's. It was the one on his more scarred arm, and the palm was calloused, and scars were slightly raised. Katsuki had to hold himself back from swiping his thumb over the back to feel the scar there, worried that Deku would let go if he did. Maybe he should have done that. By the time they reached the lookout point halfway through the roundabout hike, he had relaxed into the feeling a bit, his heart not racing so much. Katsuki had done the hike a couple times before, and the view was always great. Deku just made it better. He was staring out with wide, sparkling green eyes, an open-mouthed smile spread across his face, dark forest curls ruffling in the wind. Deku breathed out a small wow, and Katsuki had to bite his tongue to stop himself from doing something dumb and impulsive. Deku was so much. Eventually, they headed back down to the car, at which point Deku tripped over a small rock and Katsuki pulled him upright. Deku's eyes shot wide and he jolted his hand away, flushing red. "Oh my gosh, Kaken," he squeaked. "I'm so sorry. Didn't realize I never let go." Katsuki swallowed his dumb FNG nerves and shrugged, knowing he was FNG blushing but hoping it wasn't too obvious. "Es fine." Deku didn't look convinced. "So sorry again, that was pretty weird of me, I don't know how I didn't notice dash." "Deku," Katsuki snapped, cutting him off before he could start nervous rambling. "I said it's fine. I would have pushed you off if I cared." Well, he did care, just in the opposite direction. Deku still looked nervous and pink in the face, and his eyes kept flitting around but not meeting Katsuki's. Katsuki had been controlling impulses all day, and he was fed up now, so only after he had grabbed Deku's hand again did he realize that was probably the dumbest thing he could have done. Too late to back out now. "See," he said, holding their hands up. "Fine?" "Yes, fine. This was fine. Friends hold hands. Mina holds hands with her friends all the time. No big deal." Katsuki quickly averted his eyes from Deku's shocked face and started dragging him the rest of the way to the parking lot. He let go as soon as they got his car and got in without a word, which was probably weird as F-, but he did not trust whatever words might have come out at that moment. Deku got in next to him, and he forced himself to glance over to see his reaction. He was smiling like a dumbass. "Okay, that was worth it." Deku turned to look at him, still smiling, and Katsuki averted his attention to turning on the radio before he said or did something dumb. Just like on the drive over, Deku spent most of the time humming along to old songs their parents used to love and singing whatever lyrics he knew. He wasn't too bad of singer, but he probably wasn't winning any talent shows anytime soon. Katsuki liked hearing it anyway. By the time they got back to the campus, it had started pouring rain, and Deku had tired out enough to be half asleep against the car door. Katsuki parked, then reached out to poke his shoulder. Deku immediately shot up and made some weird squeaking noise. "Hello." Deku blinked for a second, then rubbed his eyes. "Oh gosh, I think I fell asleep." "I noticed," Katsuki said, poking his cheek. "We're back though." Deku nodded slowly, then yawned and rolled his shoulders back. "Man, I'm hungry. I should probably go grocery shopping. I don't have much food in my room." "We could go somewhere right now," Katsuki blurted. Deku grinned. "Sure. I already miss Mrs. Kirishima's ramen, let's go back there." Then, to Katsuki's mild surprise and confusion, he unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the car door. "Last one there pays," Deku chirped, then shot out of the car into the rain. Katsuki did an embarrassing mad scramble to get out of the car and lock it behind him before sprinting after Deku, who had already gotten way too much of a head start. Fing cheater. Katsuki was soaked through his sweatshirt by the time he got to the ramen place, whacking a just as wet Deku on the shoulder as the latter laughed. "You," Katsuki snapped without much venom, squeezing next to Deku under the small awning so he could try to shake himself dry before going inside. "I told you you'd be paying next," Deku said, smiling and running his fingers through his wet hair to push it back off his forehead. That was kind of hot." Katsuki pulled his gaze away after what he hoped was only a second, focusing on squeezing water out of his hoodie sleeves, then opened the door, squishing Deku behind it as he did. Deku made noises of betrayal, then slipped through after him. "Back so soon?" Mrs. Kirishima said, looking up from wiping off the counter and smiling. "Afternoon, Mrs. Kirishima," Katsuki said. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Kirishima," Deku chirped, bowing. "Guess I couldn't stay away too long." Thanks kid. You two looked soaked." "This dummy decided running here was a good idea," Katsuki said, jerking a thumb towards Deku and taking a seat. "You ran after me," Deku said, sliding into the seat next to him, "so you're just as much of a dummy as I am." Katsuki glared at him, but Deku just smiled and shrugged innocently. "Well, let me warm you two up with some good food, huh?" Mrs. Kirishima said, tossing her cleaning rag over her shoulder. "That would be wonderful," Deku answered. He seemed to be in a really good mood for someone who just ran 3 blocks through soaking wet rain. But Katsuki could relate. Deku kept the energy throughout the meal, and somehow Katsuki found himself in the middle of him and Mrs. Kirishima tossing stupid puns back and forth. At one point, Deku laughed so hard at some joke about rocks he almost choked on his noodles. "Fing dork." "Thanks, Mrs. Kirishima," Katsuki said, handing over the payment and starting towards the door. "Yes, thank you so much for the meal," Deku said, bowing again. "You're welcome, kids," Mrs. Kirishima said, waving. "See you later." "So," Katsuki said when they made it outside and under the awning, "you make friends with moms now?" Deku smirked at him, or at least as close as someone like Deku could get to a smirk, and said, "What, you jealous she likes me better than you?" Katsuki opened his mouth to retort, but no sound came out, because Deku's hair was still slicked back, a few strands falling out of place, and he was smirking down at him with one eyebrow raised. In other words, he looked a lot hotter than usual. Usually he was just pretty or cute. This was new. "Snap out of it, Katsuki." "F off," he eventually managed. He felt like a malfunctioning robot that reverted to a few default phrases every time it overloaded. You shut up." Deku's smirk turned into his smile, and he slung an arm around Katsuki's shoulder, just like that morning. "Don't worry, Kaken, I'm sure she still likes you fine." Katsuki elbowed him in the waist, both as revenge for the quip and to get his arm off. It wasn't that Katsuki didn't like it, but because he liked it way too much. And with Deku deciding to look hot right now, he had no idea what he might do if they kept standing that close together. Nothing congruent with his plan, that's for sure. And nothing he deserved to do. Deku laughed at his jab, then pulled his hood up and started back towards campus. After a moment of space, Katsuki did the same. By the time they reached Deku's dorm building, Katsuki was once again drenched. Deku didn't look much better off, but he was smiling brightly anyways, turning the full force of his cheer onto Katsuki when they got to the front door. Thanks for inviting me out, Kaken. That was fun. Yeah, next time it can be that sunrise hike, Katsuki said, making a desperate, conscious effort to stay focused on what Deku was saying instead of just his face. Deku's smile dropped. Then he made an overly dramatic, determined face and brought up his fist. I'll do it for you, Kaken. You are so dumb sometimes. I'm glad I have you back to remind me every day, Deku said, smiling again and bending forward a bit. For a moment, the rain coming down around them blurred all of Katsuki's thoughts into white noise as he met Deku's eyes and lopsided smile. The white noise of the rain glitched into complete TV static when Deku leaned in all the way and pressed a kiss to his rain-soaked cheek. And then he immediately turned and disappeared into the dorm building, leaving Katsuki standing befuddled in the downpour, brain a foggy mess. The rain started to come down harder, and a drop in Katsuki's eye was finally enough to shock him into movement and back into his car, dripping wet and smiling. He moved his car to the parking lot in front of his own dorm building, then got to his room as quickly as he could, creating a small puddle on his floor when he got through the door. God, he hated rain. Worth it. He stripped his clothes and wrung them out in his shower, then tossed them in the laundry hamper and got on new ones. He even had to towel his hair dry. After doing this, he opted to text Deku, figuring the dumbass would do something stupid and get himself sick. You better change into dry clothes or some sheet. You'll get sick. Ah, thanks, Kaken. Don't worry, I have plenty warmed myself up. See, I even have hot cocoa, laughing face. The next attachment was a picture of Deku, a mirror selfie in his bathroom, 1 foot up on the sink counter to show off his All Might-themed pajama pants. His hair was damp and frizzy, and he had an elbow propped up on his knee, holding an also All Might-themed mug. Katsuki's also pretty sure his t-shirt said, "Socks," on it. He was grinning at the camera. How could someone be so hot, cute and fing dorky at the same time? I see you still have everything All Might themed, you indie nerd. Of course I do. Though I hardly got to bring any of it to school with me, double frowny face. So you just left it all with Auntie? Yeah. Poor Auntie. Are you saying you don't have a lot of All Might merch? Am I a bigger All Might fan than you now? Surprised face. You so are not, how dare you say such a thing? I don't know, Kaken, I don't see you with All Might PJs now, do I? I think I'm winning right now. Give me a second, I'll make you eat those words. Katsuki dropped his phone on his counter, then went to rifle through his dresser until he found what he was looking for. All Might sweatpants and an All Might costume-themed sweatshirt, both of which things he rarely wore in front of other people. He didn't doubt that Deku had more merch than him, but that didn't make him more of a fan, and yes, it briefly occurred that comic books were a pretty kiddie thing to compete about, but hey, this was Deku. He took a picture in his own bathroom mirror, same pose as Deku, then sent it. Wow, so cool. Guess we're even, laughing face. No, I won. By whose judgment? Ashed Kaken. You are insufferable. You just noticed this? Stop being funny, I'm going to choke on my hot cocoa. Katsuki couldn't stop a smile at the fact that he apparently made Deku laugh that hard. That's a you problem, loser. Kaken, you are killing me. You are killing your best friend. Do you even care? You ain't dead yet, obviously. If you keep this up I will be soon, and where would that leave you? Huh? Katsuki stared at his phone for a second, then decided that a little honesty was the best way to go here. This was an opportunity, after all, even if Deku was joking. Pretty sad, but I'll live. There'd be a solid year of mourning, then I'd be good to go. You'd take that long? That's sweet of you, thanks. You'd better if I do the same, nerd. Oh, for sure. Deal? Dude. Wait, please don't die though. Deku, neither of us are actually gonna die. Oh yeah, I forgot you're too stubborn to die. Sure am. Good, smiley face. Okay, I'm gonna go take a nap, because you made me wake up and do things. See you later, Kaken. See you. Katsuki smiled a bit, then put his phone down and set himself to work on his studies. All in all, he thinks this day was a success. The next afternoon was what Mina loved to call the Bakuquad study sesh, but Katsuki thought of as, the idiots force me to help them for 3 hours. His therapist called it social bonding time. Whatever it was called, it always ended up with him being badgered with questions about whatever classes his friends needed his help with as he slowly went insane. But today, for some reason, he was feeling a little more generous. If that reason was his day with Deku yesterday, no one needed to know that but his innermost thoughts. Dunce face, we learned that sheet in 3rd year high school, Katsuki said, shoving the textbook back across the table. Kaminari frowned down at it, then slumped forward and put his face in his hands. I don't remember though, Kaminari groaned. Then read it over again, dumps. The new stuff will make more sense if you remember the fucking basics, Katsuki said a lot nicer than he could've, then turned back to his own work. You still have assignments, Bakugou? Kirishima said from next to him, usually you're done by now. Katsuki glared at him. I was effing busy yesterday. He tried to get more work done, but he kept getting distracted by sudden reminders that he spent multiple hours holding hands with Deku, then images of Deku in the rain, then Deku texting him about some new hero comic that just came out. Stupid Deku was going to make him fail his classes at this rate. With what? Mina asked. Yeah, with what? Siro repeated, you never do things unless we make you. F off. Katsuki snapped. I do plenty of sheet without you idiots. We mean fun stuff, Blasty, Mina said, waving her manicured hand next to her face and smiling, not practicing your scowls in the mirror for an hour or whatever you were doing. Screw you, Bubblegum, Katsuki growled, glaring at her then turning back to his work. There was a moment of silence, and Katsuki thought maybe the topic would be dropped. Of course, it wasn't. Wait, Mina said, leaning across the table a bit. Now I'm very curious as to what you were doing, because that was almost civil. Yeah, you're in a good mood or something, Siro added. Okay, what the F dash? Katsuki looked up again, leering. You'd rather I smash the table in half, dipshits? He was in a good mood, but he wouldn't be for much longer if they kept this sheet up. No, just tell us what you did yesterday. Mina smiled. Katsuki glared at her some more, stubbornly refusing to open his mouth just because of her teasing. Okay, Mina continued after a moment, we can guess then. He saw Midoriya again, Kaminari said immediately, making Katsuki tense and grip his mechanical pencil so tight he heard it crack. I think that's a yes. Guys, hold up, Kirishima cut in before Katsuki could start yelling or his friends could start teasing. We promised not to bother him about that. No, we promised not to play matchmaker or meddle. Mina corrected. There was no ban on asking him about it. Well, there is now, Katsuki snapped, closing his laptop and swinging his bag around his shoulder, then standing from his seat and leaving without another word. He heard a few people call out, but Kirishima must have stopped them because no one followed him. He made it out of the building they were studying in, then headed straight for a nearby tree and slumped down against it, tossing his things to the side. He leaned his head back against the trunk, feeling the rough bark on his back and taking in the sparse fall leaves above. He and Deku used to do this. They'd finally get tired from running around all day and collapse next to each other in the shade of the trees at their local park. Deku would point out any cloud shape he could see, making up stories about them that Katsuki would inevitably take over, claiming Deku wasn't as good at it. Deku always told stories about saving bunnies and citizens. Katsuki always turned the focus to defeating the villains. The hero would win and save all the endangered creatures, and Deku would applaud and sprinkle flowers and leaves over Katsuki as a celebration. Because, of course, Katsuki always ended up writing himself in as the aforementioned hero. Because it was always him. About him. Katsukis need to be the hero. Katsukis need to be cool. Katsukis need to be strong. Katsukis need to be the best. And the F-ed-up definition he had of all those things. Being the hero meant coming out on top, no matter what. Being cool meant people liked you, meant you didn't hang out with losers. Being strong meant not needing anyone or anything, especially not some weakling. Being the best meant doing it on your own. So he built up these walls to keep people out, to keep himself to what he thought was right. He shoved Deku away and built up the walls brick by brick, forcing him out. Or trying to force him out, at least. Because Deku didn't want to let him do that. Deku pounded on the walls and begged him to stay, and just as Katsuki was considering adding a door, he left. Now, Katsuki wanted to let him in. Wanted to build a door and give Deku the only key. Wanted to bring him inside with him. He wanted it so desperately, but he didn't know if he deserved it. He made Deku happy, didn't he? That was his goal. To change, to grow, to nurture the relationship and prove he could be better. To make himself deserving. He didn't think he could ever deserve to decide whether or not he should be forgiven, because that choice was Deku's and Deku's alone. But he could decide if he was worthy of asking for forgiveness. He wanted to be one of things that made Deku smile and laugh and be happy. And he was. He should know, because every time Deku smiled at him was some monumental event in his brain. He reached the end of train of thought, and realized that, really, the only thing holding him back now was fear. Fear that it wouldn't work out. Fear that he'd be shot down. But that was all bullshit and excuses. He loved him. So he could apologize. He could say what Deku deserved to hear. He couldn't let Deku keep being so kind and dorky and amazing without making sure he knew how much Katsuki regretted it. He wanted Deku to smile at him because he'd earned it, with no hesitation in either of their minds. He took a deep breath of the crisp fall air, watching leaf detach from the tree and flutter to the grass. Nature and silence, two of his favorite things. They let him think. Bakugou. That not so much. Of course Kirishima would follow him eventually. His friend approached the tree slowly, then sat a few feet away and stared at him for a second. Katsuki stared back, not feeling like snapping and not sure what else to say. Hey, dude, Kirishima started, then trailed off. I'm fine, Katsuki said. Okay. Kirishima kept staring at him, not looking entirely convinced. I'm serious, Katsuki said. I'm fine. Don't start pitying me or some shit. I'm not. Kirishima said quickly, holding his hands up. I promise I'm not. You said you can handle it, and I trust you. It's just a little concerning when you storm off like that. Katsuki reined in his first instincts to yell and defend, forcing out a breath. Kirishima was right, he left without explanation. I didn't want to deal with them. Working on controlling his emotions, he'd found, meant stepping out before he got overwhelmed and set off. Better to think things over and release the anger through some healthy outlet than go off on people who barely deserved it. His friends weren't being malicious, they were just curious. But storming out could also leave a bad impression. Complicated people and their complicated emotions. Yeah, man, I know, Kirishima said. They all say they're sorry. That's not needed, Katsuki responded. Teasing each other is what his friends did. He could take some teasing if it weren't for the other shit going on. If everything somehow went well, they'd get to do that eventually. He huffed, then grabbed his stuff and stood up, waiting for Kirishima to do the same. Are you leaving or are you coming back? Katsuki thought on that for a moment, then shrugged. You all would fail your classes without me. Kirishima grinned at him. Friendship. Kaken. Deku called from his seat at the lunch table, waving his hand above his head. Come here. Katsuki stopped at the space between tables, looking down at him. Where do you think I was going? Deku laughed and rolled his eyes, then turned to grab something from the bag behind him. Tada! He chirped, holding up a finger that had an old All Might keychain dangling off of it. A rare one by the looks of it, part of a merch set fans could only get from cons. Is that a new one? Katsuki said, squinting a bit. No, it's from a few years ago, but it's a rare one. Deku said, smiling. Obviously I can tell that, nerd. Deku snorted again, raising an eyebrow. I think you should say that one more time, but slower. You, Katsuki laughed, flicking Deku's forehead. Why are you showing your old merch? Thought we agreed that I won that contest. Okay, Deku said, closing his hand around the keychain and pointing a finger at him. We agreed on nothing. You judged it yourself. I'd say I judged it well though. Katsuki smirked. You were so biased. Deku protested. then closed his eyes and put his hands out, keychain still hanging on his finger. Stop making me want to fight you when I'm trying to give you a gift. You're what? Deku opened his eyes, grinning, and held out the keychain. A gift. You gave me Anpan, then I stole your hoodie, so I wanted to give you something too. I didn't give you that sheet expecting something in return, Katsuki clarified, trying not to succumb to the grin. I know that, Kaken. This is just another random friend gift. Here. Before Katsuki knew it, Deku grabbed his hand and put the keychain in it, then closed his fist around it and smiled up at him again. No give-backs. Katsuki huffed at him, then tried for a smile and sat in his own seat. Katsuki knew Deku well enough to trust he actually wasn't giving him the keychain out of obligatory politeness, which was making him feel very weird. He should just start calling it the Deku feeling. He could also feel the unhealthy level of attachment to the gift forming, so he quickly clipped it to his bag and set it to the side. He fiddled with the keychain during his therapy appointment that afternoon, twisting it between his fingers and feeling the texture in his hands. Something about the gift solidified the determination in his chest. He had to do this. What do you think about writing it out? Dr. Nakamura asked. That seems fake as sheet, Katsuki answered, frowning. Not necessarily, Dr. Nakamura said. Writing things out helps us organize our thoughts. You don't have to read from it or memorize it, though you could if you wanted. It can just provide a helpful space to figure out what you want to say and why. Katsuki thought on that for a moment. Writing things out is what Deku always used to do. He probably had hundreds of notebooks by now. Notebooks that Katsuki had destroyed, on occasion. I can try it. Want to do it now? Dr. Nakamura said, offering him a notebook and pen. Katsuki took them. Sure. Just write whatever comes to mind. What you feel. Easy for her to say,